Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it.
Lucy looked anxiously at her granddaughter. The elderly woman's anxiety was so strong that she involuntarily moved her hand, which was tightened by the cuff of the tonometer. But the house doctor, with all the sternness of an elementary school teacher, remarked to the grandmother, "I asked you to lie still, and your hands are twitching. You'll have to try it on again," the teacher told the grandmother, expressing her displeasure. The patient made an expressive gesture that spoke eloquently of her displeasure at wasting time if it was already clear. There was both despair and indignation in the older woman's voice, but Cindy had long since gotten used to her grandmother's maneuvers, paying no attention to the old woman's sighs. She was pumping the cuff to the limit again. Lucy, for propriety's sake, bore it obediently, but she would not express her feelings in words. She watched her granddaughter's actions, expecting a death sentence, but Cindy didn't live up to that expectation. "Grandma, you could be on the astronaut team, couldn't you? 130 over 80. That's the score of a well-trained athlete." She didn't like her granddaughter's tone, let alone the results. Acting gravely ill, she changed from a horizontal to a sitting position. "Your machine is lying. You can throw it away for lack of use." Too bad mine broke down at the wrong time, but it was always right. "I can tell from my condition that my upper blood pressure is off the charts, at least 200. Cindy was well versed in the intricacies of her grandmother's character and didn't even take offense at her assessment of the imported device's abilities. "Okay, if you don't trust me, let me call an ambulance," Cindy said. Lucy's face changed instantly, and her entire large body expressed outrage. With a bloodthirsty tone in her voice, she declared, "Is this where the dog is buried? I knew it. I could feel it. You and your mother are so eager to shove me into the hospital to be finally finished off." Cindy laughed. "Grandma, the hospital is where people get healed. And the fact that Mom and I are trying to talk some sense into you is the opposite, a sign of caring. You have no idea how much we love you." The granddaughter hugged the woman tightly and kissed her deeply wrinkled cheeks. Lucy was touched. More than anything else in the world, she treasured such moments. The burden of years had left many wounds on the old lady's heart, and not all of them had healed completely. So she wished her family would pay more attention to her. Today, too, towards morning, she felt uncomfortable with loneliness, as if it was following her from every corner. At times like that, she was very afraid. That's why she called Cindy. But the girl did not even reproach her relative for such an early call. Remembering it now, Lucy decided to apologize. "Cindy, I'm sorry I got you up at 600, but I thought the woman with the sigh that was already at the bedside. I know it's time to get ready, but I just want to live a little longer." It's okay. I have to be at work by 8 o'clock anyway. I don't like your moody attitude. There's a saying that as long as you're alive, you should think about life." "Yeah, I try to think. When I look in the mirror, I get so scared." Lucy is obviously flirting because she looks quite good for her age. Despite her advanced age, she looks after herself and likes new outfits. Her daughter and granddaughter try to please her every wish, and Marie, Cynthia's mother, many times offered her to move into her spacious apartment, but the grandmother categorically rejects this possibility. "I've never lived and I want to die in my own apartment. Tony and I earned those square meters with our own labor." Lucy liked to make her life an example to others. She used every opportunity to engage the other person in her memories. While Cindy was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, Grandma didn't miss the opportunity either. "If you knew, granddaughter, how hard times were back then. Hunger, devastation, unsettled. People walked around happy because they valued life. Now they value money more." Cindy walked smoothly into the small living room with a tray. "Everything's ready. Let's get breakfast. I'm really going to be late for work." "You young people, all in a hurry. Where are you running to?" "In such a hurry to get married and then divorced," she said. "You better tell me, Cindy, am I going to have great-grandchildren?" It wasn't the first time her grandmother had started a conversation on the subject, but the girl had always shrugged it off, replying that she had to get married first. Lucy set her cup to the side and eyed her granddaughter curiously. "So why the affair? Have all the men in Russia disappeared?" Vaughn, your grandfather Tony, came back from the war without one leg, and there was no shortage of brides. But your grandfather chose you, and proudly so, the old woman said. Who else could he choose but a labor striker? I have so many diplomas, and even have awards from the government. At that time, such girls were valued. Yes, and your grandfather, despite his disability, was an extraordinary man and looked back on women for others, so you had to be on your guard. Cindy knew Grandma's love story well, but each time new details emerged. Lucy had never told her before that Tony had shown a weakness for the female sex. You never told me about Grandpa's adventures, Grandma, Cindy said. A heavy sigh was heard. It's not customary to speak ill of the dead. He drank my blood, your grandfather. Still, I loved him and forgave him everything. It's easy now. Anything goes wrong, and we're off in different directions. We put up with it because we were ashamed. We'd also felt sorry for the kids. Tony had 3 of them on the spot. The women at the construction site laughed at me, saying, "Do you go to the maternity hospital like you go to work?" Every year at almost the same time. That was our life, and we loved each other dearly, Lucy said. Cindy looked at the antique clock that was inexorably counting the minutes. Of course, Grandma, I always enjoy talking to you, but I don't want to be late for work. But I want to tell you in confidence that maybe soon your wish will come true. Oh, Lucy exclaimed. Cindy, do you know what I mean? Who is he, tell me? The girl replied, don't you understand? Just don't tell anyone yet. But I myself don't know what will happen to Steve yet. He's a simple and very kind guy. We've been dating for almost a year now, and my parents don't know. Cindy quickly cleared the table and was preparing to leave, but she remembered something important and stopped. Why are you so anxious to wait for great-grandchildren? She asked. Lucy sighed expressively again. I don't know if it's true or not, but they say that a woman who is lucky enough to have great-grandchildren is forgiven her sins. Cindy laughed. I had no idea you were superstitious. That's news to me. I'm a striker and a communist, and believing in omens doesn't mix all that well. Life is such a thing that sometimes incompatible things happen. Whoever thought the world would turn upside down like this? As Cindy walked to the bus stop, she couldn't get her grandmother's last remark out of her head about the world being upside down. Mentally, she recognized the old lady's right, because really, just in the last few years, things had changed a lot. So many people were trying to keep the good and kind relationships that had brought them together before. When Cindy crossed the threshold of the office where 12 employees peacefully coexisted, Jane immediately turned her attention to her. Why are you late? The person in charge was already coming in. Good thing I didn't notice your absence. What's wrong with you? She asked. Cindy tried to explain with gestures. What's the big deal? Can you elaborate? Said Jane. Only brides and Christmas trees shine like that. What kind of day is it today? First, Grandma's been asking me since this morning when I'm getting married, and now you. Okay, I'm going to give you some up-to-date information just for you. I'm not planning a wedding yet, but I might be suitable for the role of a Christmas tree, she said jokingly. You're joking, but I know you and Steve are serious, so I hope to be your friend at the wedding, at least near someone else's happiness, Cindy added. The desks were tightly arranged, the friends standing close together, so no one would pay attention to their conversation. Cindy moved even closer to Jane. I don't get it. You and Tim were okay, weren't you? She asked. Cindy was shocked by Jane's confession. To be honest, I was even jealous of you. Everything looked so beautiful and romantic. What was the reason for your breakup? Did he lie to you or betray you? Cindy asked. Jane replied, well, you'd have to try really hard to lie to me. It's just that times are hard for both of us right now, and Tim is working casual jobs. And I, as a young and beautiful girl, want to live in constant celebration, and preferably every day. Cindy couldn't believe her ears. So what happened to love? She asked. Jane looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. I didn't realize you were naive to that extent. Love is when you have the ability to satisfy your little whims at someone else's expense, she said. Cindy made the decision not to discuss her boyfriend with Jane again. She wasn't satisfied with her friend's assessment of their relationship. Instead, she suggested switching to work to avoid repercussions for their long-time relationship. Although Cindy still felt an unpleasant residue after the conversation, Valerie was not embarrassed by it, and she did not insist on continuing to discuss the topic. At the end of the workday, Cindy agreed to go for a walk with Jane, although she had her own plans for the evening. She realized that Jane would take up a lot of her time and she was a little uneasy. "Okay, I'll try to make you feel a little better," Cindy said. She didn't have time to finish her sentence, however, when Jane was already clapping her hands happily. "Mittens and Snowflake. Yay! I haven't been to a movie in ages," she exclaimed. Cindy didn't have time to add that she and Steve wanted to go to the movie alone. When Steve saw that Cindy had shown up for a date with Jane, he showed no surprise, since they had met several times before with this friend. Steve took a negative impression of Jane and expressed his displeasure that she had joined their cultural event. He hinted that he had only expected to spend time with Cindy. Jane was not surprised at this hint and laughed out loud. "We can buy a term. True, it will cost 3 times as much, but the matter will be settled," she said. She turned Steve's attention to a hooded guy standing nearby and pointed at him in surprise. "That guy over there sure has tickets," Jane said. Steve was surprised. "You're even informed in such matters." Steve marveled. "Yeah, it's dangerous to be friends with you," he continued. Jane smiled back. "That's how you have to 1 and 2 and produce an effect," she said. "On the contrary, it's very useful to be friends with me. And this fellow I know because I bought clothes from him more than once. He used to paint on rags, imported from abroad," she added. "Steve, please hurry up. Otherwise, Cindy and I are about to turn into icicles." "It's Arctic cold," she urged. Cindy had been silent the whole time, not expecting her friend to act so openly in the presence of her boyfriend. She hadn't noticed Jane's habits before, such as laughing loudly or pointing a finger at a person in public. She even regretted that she hadn't culturally summoned up her friend, for whom she now had to blush in front of Steve. Somewhere inside her, a warning beacon went off. "Watch out, or your best friend will steal your boyfriend." But by the look of Steve and his mood, it was easy to guess that Jane annoyed him a lot. During the session, her friend didn't hold back much either. She was commenting aloud on the actions of the characters and was constantly cutting her in her seat. Therefore, Cindy did not thickly and did not watch the picture with the participation of a famous Italian actor. Jane, on the other hand, had quite a bit. "I was so looking forward to seeing this movie." "Thank you, Steve." Jane's gaze on Steve was so intrusive that Cindy became uncomfortable. It seemed to her that her friend was completely oblivious to the fact that Steve was dating her. In a minute, she could have literally pounced on him. "Friends, I don't understand why you have those facial expressions like you just drank a spoonful of fish oil. Remember when they used to feed it to us at daycare?" Jane burst into loud laughter. Cindy just nodded in response, not wanting to delve further into this awkward moment. She was already ready to say goodbye to her friend as they stood in the driveway of Jane's house. But Jane wasn't going to part so easily. "Guys, I understand, but I'm warning you that I will be a bridesmaid at your wedding and no other candidates are being considered," she stated. Steve replied calmly that he had to upset Valerie because he and Cindy would not be having a wedding. The joy on Jane's face was instantly replaced with surprise. She couldn't realize that Steve was also refusing to get married and wasn't even embarrassed to say so publicly. In response, Steve skillfully put the insolent girl in her place. Cindy watched with satisfaction as Jane struggled to comprehend the meaning of the words. Steve explained that their decision to forgo a noisy wedding didn't mean that anyone was leaving anyone behind. They just wanted to have a wedding without the publicity of going to a registry office and spend the money on something useful. Jane was quite surprised by this. She compared them to American movies where the characters go on a trip right after the wedding. "Steve, you're good," she said. For the next 15 minutes, all 3 of them started jumping in place to keep warm because the frost was already creeping through their warm clothes. Finally, Jane gave up. "That was a nice evening tonight. Why don't we go to the restaurant again like this?" she suggested. Cindy tried to apologize to Steve for Jane's behavior. "I'm sorry you had to listen to Jane's coddling. She's generally a nice girl. It's just that something happened today," and she snapped. "I didn't expect it to get so ugly myself," she said. "Yes, we had to communicate with different people. But one thing I don't understand is what you two have in common. You're so different," Steve said. "Well, there's no mystery. It's just that we've been friends since we were kids, went to daycare together, sat at the same desk. Jane's always been reckless. Her dad is a big shot, and she's used to always getting what she wants, Cindy explained. But her daddy better teach her some manners, he added. I had a hard time holding back when she started asking about our wedding. I really wanted to sass her, Steve admitted. Cindy experienced the shock of such an announcement. She froze in place, feeling her heart begin to beat harder. What? Are you serious? She squeezed out of herself. Steve stepped closer and took her hand in his. Yes, I am serious. I thought tonight would be the right time, but now everything has changed. Do you agree? He asked. Cindy was at a complete loss. She was silent for a long time, worrying and thinking about how things had turned so suddenly. Finally, she turned her head towards Steve and said quietly, Yes, I'd agree. Of course you do. Half of the procedure is done, and now for part 2. Please, maestro, fanfare. Steve Durakier played the orchestra himself, and then solemnly extracted a velvet box from his pocket. Here, as is proper on such occasions, is a ring. The girl opened the box in the color of a street lamp, and a jewel winked cheerfully at her with a bright gleam. Oh, it's a real diamond, she exclaimed. It was the happiest day of Cindy's life. She couldn't sleep for a long time, replaying every minute of the wonderful evening. On that frosty February night, spring was ringing in her heart, and she believed that the best was yet to come. The first year in married life flew by. Cindy couldn't escape the feeling that it was all happening in a dream. The women at work jeered at her. There's a vibe going around from our Cindy. You can get a free load of happiness. You shouldn't flaunt your prosperous life, she said. Cindy sensed the sadness in her friend's voice and realized that Jane felt jealousy and envy. She looked at Jane with compassion and said, Jane, each of us is going our own way. You will find your happiness, absolutely. I, on the other hand, am just lucky to have such a wonderful partner in life as Steve. Jane smiled and nodded. Yes, you're right, Cindy. I'm happy for you. It's just hard to deal with your own emotions sometimes, she admitted. Their friendship had continued, but since then Jane had become more circumspect in her comments and hadn't openly expressed her envious feelings. The girl wondered. On the contrary, it always seemed to me that happy people radiate kindness. Personally, I am ready to share it with anyone. What do you mean, Steve? Are you going to rent your own? Jane didn't expect you to say that. If you weren't my friend, I'd be really mad at you. Sometimes I feel like you're not happy for me or I owe you something. Cindy almost cried with resentment, so Jane tried to remedy the situation. Why do you say that? You know I don't mean that. Well, my tongue's just so bad. It's just talking nonsense. No offense. I'm not upset with you, Steve, about the wedding that didn't work out. The tension was relieved, and both girls smiled at the end of the meal when they put down their plates of dessert. Jane asked Cindy with a piercing sadness, What is happiness like? I guess it's different for each person. You know, I recently came across a collection of poems by a poetess. Anyway, she lived through the war. There was love and betrayal in her life. One of her poems struck me. It's about happiness, which this woman had spent her whole life collecting in bits and pieces. But you can't get much happiness this way, although it is very beautifully said. Yes, beautiful and right. You know, Jane, my grandmother told me many times about her youth. I mean, Grandpa was legless, and she'd cut her throat for him. I'm sorry, I didn't put it well, but according to my beloved grandmother's stories, it used to be the man himself was valued, and it didn't matter what his physical shortcomings were. It was what was inside that mattered. Jane looked at Cindy with wide eyes. Well, you're a real piece of work, girlfriend. You shouldn't be in accounting. You should be lecturing at some liberal arts college. And I'll be leaving accounting soon. What? Another surprise. Steve, did you get another job? You could say that. We're about to have a new addition. This news took Valerie by surprise. She did not have time to prepare for it internally, and on her pretty face flashed a displeased grimace. But quickly pulling herself together, the girl read naively, Cindy, I'm so happy for you. I mean for the two of you. Of course, so much happiness, and in one hand, it can be mind-boggling. But if I missed your wedding, where I wanted to be a bridesmaid, at least take me as your godparent. Cindy made no promises. She dodged a direct answer with the catchphrase, I have to have a baby and then think about everything else. By the way, my grandmother used to say that you shouldn't even buy clothes for an unborn child. It's a very bad omen. And it seems to me that all this is nonsense. Ancient beliefs, as they say, what is to be, that will not pass. Personally, when I get ready for motherhood, I'll prepare everything in advance for the baby. How I envy you now. I want it all too. To reassure her friend, Cindy advised, you will have it all, Jane. You just have to change your outlook on life a little. A crane in the sky looks more attractive because it's high up in the distance and the imperfections are not noticeable. I get the hint. But the tits in your version won't do me any good. It's easy for you to reason because your Steve has achieved what others have not. He's got a good job and a good salary. You're behind him like a wall, but a tit. It's a utopia. Anyone who can't make it to the sky needs help. I'm not ready to be a wall, and I'm not ready. Cindy wasn't in the habit of imposing her opinion on others. She decided that there was no point in arguing with her friend about the values of life. After this conversation, their paths began to diverge in different directions. Cindy began to avoid eating together at the cafeteria, and Jane didn't insist. Soon her friend was promoted, and Jane decided to celebrate her professional triumph with a bang. Girls on such an occasion, and I do not hide the glade. The meeting place is the Pines campground outside of town. Please don't be late. After handing out the instructions, Jane walked over to the table where Cindy was sitting. I hope you're not afraid from the collective, she said. But Cindy pointed to her belly. Where am I going with a watermelon like that? If it were still here locally, then I'd be sure to spend time in warm company. I'm not going out of town. I don't want to take any chances. Well, suit yourself, Jane objected. A month before her maternity leave, Cindy felt ill. Her legs were swelling badly. There were unsightly spots on her face. After conferring with her husband, she decided to take a leave of absence. With application in hand, she entered the supervisor's office without knocking. Jane, I need a vacation, Cindy said. Jane glared at her with an unfriendly look. First of all, it's not Jane, it's Jane Croft. And secondly, cultured people knock before entering the supervisor's office. What have you got there? Although the freshly promoted supervisor could clearly see that Cindy was having difficulty standing, she didn't even offer her a chair. On the contrary, she studied the short text of only 2 lines for several minutes. I'm sorry, but I have to turn you down. The annual report is coming up, you understand. But I'm going on maternity leave in less than a month anyway, Cindy objected. So you'll go on vacation like you're supposed to in a month. Cindy was already at the door when she heard the sarcastic words. So how's your happiness going? She's been picking a lot of seeds. Care to share? Cindy was struck not by the words, but by the tone with which her friend spewed her gloating. But the new boss decided to continue. Now look at you and me and answer me, which one of us is happier? You're painful to look at. Sprawled out like a frog. I'm in shape. Good position, salary, respect. I'll settle in a little and I'll find a husband. Cindy could almost physically feel the last thread that had connected her to her friend severed. It must have taken a toll on her health, because that evening she was admitted to the hospital. Steve was very worried about the condition of the spouse and the future child, but the doctor assured that everything will be fine. There is no particular reason to worry. Just your wife was a little nervous, but it will pass imperceptibly. She'll rest up here and be able to go home in a couple weeks. The doctor wasn't lying. Indeed, Cindy was soon discharged, and the doctor joked one last time, we'll be gone for a while. Get your strength back and come back for the baby. The rest of the time before the birth, Cindy intensively prepared for future motherhood. She reread a lot of useful literature, but she liked the book by the famous American pediatrician Benjamin Spock. When Steve caught his wife reading this treatise, he was surprised. I see that you are already very ready, and I'm allowed to study the references after all. I want to take a very active part too. I'm all for it. Here you go, Cindy replied. Steve took the book, but it was obvious that his mind was on something else. Cindy decided to help him out. Honey, is there something you wanted to ask me? There is this. Listen, I was at a meeting at City Hall the other day and I was almost speechless when I saw your friend there. Jane, I think. Yes, that's the one. but we don't talk to her anymore. If it's no secret, why? No secret. It's just that even a little power changes a person a great deal. I see. I'll keep that in mind. I almost invited her to come over to our house. Why didn't you say anything to me? Cindy, why? Steve, you've probably faced a situation at least once in your life where you've realized that you don't want to be with someone. That's what happened with Jane and me. Our friendship turned out to be a bubble, but I don't regret our breakup. It's just a little bitter. Steve, it'll pass, especially since you won't have to go back to your accounting department. Cindy, have you made up your mind for me? Steve, no, but I'd like to suggest a change of field. We're opening several branches soon, and we'll need to expand our staff. Jane, okay, honey, I'll think about it, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Although the whole family was worried about Cindy, Steve found a true friend and soulmate in Lucy. Cindy's grandmother reassured the future father, never bring yourself down. Everything will be fine. All women give birth. It's our lot by nature, and Cynthia will do just fine. The man wanted to believe the wise woman's words, but anxiety for his wife and child lingered. Thank you, Lucy, for your support. Your words to God's ears. Don't worry, honey. Heaven hears everything and angels are already circling ready to protect your baby. Cindy's father stayed on the phone. Finally, he shouted with joy, "That's it. The girl has a granddaughter." Despite the late hour, the relatives hurried to the hospital. Even Lucy decided to keep up with the company. Cindy's mother wanted to cool the old lady's ardor. "Mom, where are you going skiing? Why don't you stay home?" "No, I'm not. I'd waited this long for this day to stay home." When the delegation of relatives showed up at the emergency room, the nurse on duty looked at the unusual team with surprise. "Hold on, I'll call the ward now." Not 2 minutes later, the girl appeared. "Who was the father of the newborn?" she asked. Steve took a step forward. Wait, a little while now the doctor will be here. He wants to talk to you." The girl tried not to look into the eyes of the happily smiling Steve. There was also a strange expression on the face of the doctor who had invited him into the office. But the doctor's first words shocked the man. "It's very hard for me to say this, but the little girl wasn't born completely healthy. She has a severe heart defect, and she needs special care now. We have everything ready at home. The conditions are perfect. You misunderstand me. The baby can't breathe on her own, so we're gonna put her in a kivot. It's a special chamber where she'll be given oxygen. When she gets a little stronger in a couple of weeks, we'll send her to the perinatal center where she'll have surgery." Steve wasn't quite sure what the doctor was talking about. "What surgery? What are you talking about? I mean, she's just a tiny little thing. Tell me honestly, without surgery the baby won't survive. Your wife doesn't know anything yet. It was a difficult labor, and we decided not to tell her anything yet. So it's your decision. If it's about saving the baby's life, of course I agree. But how could this happen? Why? No one can give you a definite answer to that question. The most important thing now is to determine the treatment strategy. Do not despair. Although it is a difficult path, not all is lost. You will have to do several operations, but be courageous and patient. Basically, now the future of the baby depends on you and your wife." Steve walked out of the doctor's office and slumped down on the couch. Cindy's parents and grandmother looked anxiously at the burning father. "Steve, Dove, tell me what happened," Lucy asked, clutching at the man's arm. Cindy's parents also stood with lost faces. "What's wrong with Cindy?" "Steve, don't be quiet." Steve lowered his head slightly and wandered toward the exit. Lucy tried to catch up with him. "You can't paint it like that. They cure such diseases today, and they'll cure my granddaughter." Steve stopped and looked at the older woman with his manly smile. "I envy your optimism, Lucy, but I don't believe in angels and heavenly powers anymore. And for nothing, you should believe. Faith gives you strength." At first, Steve tried to follow his wife's grandmother's advice. He helped his wife in everything, on whose shoulders fell all the hardest. After the first operation, which little Lily was made when she was only a month and a half, the girl quickly went on the mend. As it should be, a healthy baby, she in a year already independently ran and happily made a mess in the apartment. But it is known that trouble comes from where no one expects it. Young parents rejoiced at every success of their daughter and tried to diversify her leisure time. They did not refuse the invitation of a colleague at work, whose daughter was a few months older than Lily. "Steve, come as a family to Sarah's birthday party. She's turning 2. We want to make it a fun day." The party was a great success. Happy Cindy and Steve watched their daughter play with other children with enthusiasm. However, 2 days later, problems appeared. The girl started choking and her temperature continued to be high. For 2 weeks, the child was rescued in intensive care, but a trivial cold left serious consequences. Lily never fully recovered, and she required oxygen every half an hour. The young family faced severe financial difficulties, as most of the budget was spent on medicines and trips to the best clinics. Although relatives helped as much as they could, but the funds were clearly not enough. And then there was a distinguished professor, to whom they almost got to a consultation, said, "The situation is grave. The little girl's heart is like an old woman's. It can't withstand even minimal stress." Cindy pleaded, "What can we do? Help us save the girl." The professor philosophized, "Sometimes medicine is powerless. You have a special case, but tears and prayers can't help. The only correct solution, in my opinion, would be a second operation to install an artificial valve. But it's still a temporary measure. In the long run, transplant help will be needed." Steve was wary. "Professor, what you're saying is that, yes, you read me correctly. Your daughter will need a donor heart. But I want to warn you right away that the waiting list for such an operation is scheduled for years in advance. They say that shared grief brings people closer together, but Cindy and Steve were working against that law. 6 months after consulting a famous professor, Lily had a second operation, but it had almost no positive results. The girl was practically unable to exist without the machine through which she breathed. Therefore, Cindy could not take her out even for a walk. For the mother and the sick girl, the whole world was limited to the size of their 2-room apartment with a balcony. Downstairs, life was very different, but despite her serious illness, Lily was not discouraged. She was homeschooled and eagerly awaited the arrival of her teachers. Another passion of the girl was drawing. In her incomplete 8 years, Lily, with great talent, conveyed all the shades and details of her drawings. She enjoyed showing her work to anyone who was interested. One day, a teacher who came every day said, "Your girl has talent. If you don't mind, I'll show her drawings to an artist I know who teaches at the Academy of Art." At first, Cindy didn't pay much attention to these words, but soon several of her daughter's works were given to the teacher. But soon the burden of everyday life became so heavy that Cindy forgot all about it. One day, she confessed to her mother, who visited them every day, "I feel like a snail in a shell. I imagine how my sweet grandmother would be reading these words right now. I wish she were around. I miss her very much." Mom was a real optimist. The only time I ever saw her cry was when my dad died. The rest of the time, she always had a smile on her face and filled the whole family with joy. Although we don't so much want to be like Grandma, for some reason we can't seem to make it work. Especially lately, the constant moping won't let go. I'm just hanging in there for Lily. And Steve. I mean, he's always been there for me. Or has something changed? I didn't want to dump my problems on my mother's head, but I felt a strong need to share them with someone. I don't know if it was just my sick imagination, but Steve had changed a lot, especially in the last year. He's become irritable and even rude to me. He hardly ever goes into Lily's room. You should talk to him. I tried, but he refuses to talk to me directly. I get the impression he's afraid. Afraid of me and Lily and everything that's going on here. You know, Mom, my husband's been coming home later and later, so I'm starting to think he's got another woman. And if he leaves us, I don't know how we're gonna live. Don't worry, your father and I always have a shoulder to lean on. And Steve is such a responsible man. I'm sure he wouldn't do something so mean. Oh, Mom, I can't be sure of that. He's not the same. Suddenly, Cindy remembered the teacher who had praised Lily's talent. I'm totally boring you, but there's some good news, she said. Nico, the teacher took some drawings to show the artist. Of course, I don't believe in all the Cinderella tales, but who knows? Marie said thoughtfully, I told you 100 times that my granddaughter is a diamond. It's unbelievable for such a sick child to draw so well. You should hire tutors or art education teachers for her. Mom, I'd love to, but with what money? We're barely making ends meet. Medicines are so expensive, and we only have one breadwinner, and he's often in a bad mood. I don't think these lessons will cost much. My father and I will help. Maybe our Lily will become a famous artist. By the way, where is she? Cindy nodded toward the balcony, where her daughter had organized a plein air painting session. Although you can hardly call it a real nature, it's a small oasis of green under our balcony. The girl was passionately painting, sticking out her tongue. The mask of the device did not interfere with the creative process, and the young artist deftly corrected it every time she changed her body position. Marie leaned over to examine her granddaughter's work. "Well done, my good one," she said. Suddenly, the mask slid off the girl's face, and she began to cramp her mouth. The grandmother quickly fixed the device. "You are not allowed to make any sudden movements, and you can't even get excited much either," she said. "Grandma, don't be afraid for me. I'm used to it by now. And Auntie told us that soon I'll get a special device so I can go outside with it." Cindy confirmed from afar. "Yes, we have a foundation aide, Sonny, taking over Lily's patronage. They promised to help with the purchase of a new machine. But how long will we have to wait until enough funds are raised?" Lily unhappily interrupted her mother. "Mom, you've been talking to Grandma for almost an hour. Now it's my turn." Cindy relented to her daughter and said, "Okay, dear, I'll shut up and won't bother you. I better head to the kitchen and make something delicious." While her mother was busy in the kitchen, Lily called out to her grandmother and asked, "Grandma, do you want to look at something? Mom and Dad's anniversary is coming up. How did they get married?" Marie asked in surprise. "How do you know, granddaughter?" Lily replied with confidence, "Do you think I'm just a little kid? I even walk around the apartment by myself sometimes without that nasty thing." The girl nodded at her mask and said, "Don't think that if a man has a bad heart, his head doesn't work. I understand perfectly well." Marie was amazed at this maturity of thinking in a sick girl. She asked, "Who put you up to this?" Lily replied, "Grandma, you're so full of it. I saw on TV a boy with no arms painting with his lips. I have arms and legs, but they'll replace my heart later. That's what the professor said." She laughed and said, "Oh, well, you totally distracted me. I wanted to show you the drawing I'm going to give to Mom and Dad." Lily rummaged through her drawing folder and in a second pulled out a bright and colorful drawing. It was easy to recognize Lily and her parents in the three smiling people in the drawing. The little girl corrected her mask machiniatically and asked with undisguised pleasure, "Isn't it great?" "That's just great. You're so smart." Tears came to Maria's eyes, but she tried not to upset her granddaughter and left the balcony, saying, "I'm going to go to your mom to help, and you keep drawing." The drawing with a positive story was left on the balcony. Apparently, the little artist forgot to hide it in her folder. In the evening, Steve, as usual, came in when his wife and daughter were already asleep. Steve, seeing the drawing, stopped and examined it carefully. "It's Lily's," he said. "She wanted to give it to us as a wedding anniversary present, but she forgot to put her drawing away after talking to Grandma." Steve didn't notice his wife approaching, despite her illness. "Our Lily is drawing and trying to live the life of a normal child, and she's succeeding," she said. "Too bad you don't notice that." Cindy silently retired to her bedroom. Steve looked at the drawing in the moonlight for a long time. Cindy hoped her husband would find something in himself that would make him go back to the man she knew, but he remained silent and just went to bed. In the morning, he left for work, also silent. Cindy knew from his phone conversations that he was up for a promotion, and she justified his constant delays with that. Steve's promotion made Cindy happy, of course, because it was an extra raise, and maybe they could buy Lily something more expensive that would help her better than the domestic medication. The next day, however, something happened that shook Cindy badly. Close to lunchtime, the doorbell rang. Cindy, slightly taken aback, let them inside. Strange, who could come unannounced? Standing on the doorstep was the same teacher who had admired Lily's drawings and had taken some of them to show her. Next to her was a man in his 60s. "Hello, Cindy. I apologize for the unexpected. Allow me to introduce you. This is Mark, an artist and teacher from the Academy of Art. introduced the teacher. Cindy thought she had heard his last name before on TV when he was being presented with an award. "Hello, please come in," she greeted them. The man immediately took a seat next to Lily. They started talking and his eyebrows went up every now and then in surprise. He then asked Lily if she had any of her most favorite drawings. The girl smiled. Cindy nodded in agreement. "Yes, I realize Lily has talent," she said, looking at her daughter with pride. "She tries hard and loves to draw. We always support her in that." Mark smiled. "That's great," he said. "I can see that you are very caring parents. I would like to offer Lily art lessons. I'm sure she can develop her talent even more with our help." Cindy happily agreed, and the girl smiled knowing that her dream of having her own art drawing lessons was beginning to come true. Cindy was amazed at the offer and gratefully agreed. Since then, Lily has been actively practicing with her personal teacher, developing her talent and learning new techniques and methods. Her work was exhibited in several shows and she began to be recognized as a young artist. Cindy was very proud of her daughter and they enjoyed attending all of her shows. Lily rejoiced in each new accomplishment and was grateful to her family and teacher for their support and belief in her talent. Their little oasis of green under the balcony became a symbol of hope and strength with which they overcame all difficulties and fought for Lily's bright future. On Family Day, it's a joyous occasion. Lily met on the rise because a few days before she was given a new machine. Therefore, the master of drawing could attend the presentation herself. Cindy tried not to let her daughter notice how bad she felt. As soon as it was known that the exhibition was definitely going to be, they were announced the date and time. Cindy tried to tell her husband about it. However, it didn't work on the first day. It was already past 0 o'clock, so Cindy got up early to make breakfast for Steve early, and over breakfast to tell him all about it. He walked into the kitchen, looked surprised at the amount of pancakes and scrambled eggs. Then he looked at Cindy and sighed visibly and sat down at the table. "Steve, do you want coffee or tea?" "Coffee." She set the mug in front of him. "Steve, I need to talk to you." "Cindy, I got a lot on my mind right now. I'd like to eat my breakfast too, so I can concentrate." She could see that her husband was having trouble holding back, but she wasn't gonna back down. "Okay, but what about when you're never here? I need to talk. I need to work things out. After all, you can." Cindy stepped back to the window and turned away from him. Steve looked at her closely for the first time in a long time. She had these jeans from before she was pregnant. They were so frayed they seemed purposely frayed. Some kind of uniform t-shirt. Cindy appeared very thin in it, though she did seem to have lost a lot of weight. Her hair was in bunches. He'd hated that bun always. But she used to laugh and reply, "Do I have to sweep up dust with my hair?" Yes, Cindy has changed a lot. If it's so obvious on a young woman, what to say about him and his pants? It's also about to be a year old. Sure, he has others, but it's still a long time since he buys what he wants. Yes, he doesn't buy anything at all, doesn't make anything of what he wants. All he does is work and bring in money. Sometimes he feels like he goes home after his paycheck, throws all the money into a big pot that's burning like hell, and immediately realizes that he can turn around and go back to work because there's no more money. Lately, Steve has been realizing that he's tired of it all. He doesn't want to live like this anymore. Yes, Cindy loves him, and it's not Lily's fault, but he's human too. He hasn't done anything wrong in front of God. He shouldn't have to carry all this. He's not even 40 yet, and he feels like he's well into his 60s, so the life he hasn't lived is over. There's nothing ahead of him. I mean, it's the same as it is now. Cindy turned around and Steve saw the determination in her eyes. "Cindy, don't get me started. We'll talk. We'll talk about everything. Give me a few days to gather my thoughts." She agreed abruptly. "Okay, let's do it Friday. We can't take it any further. We have a show on Sunday." She was about to say exhibition, but Steve was already out. Cindy grinned sadly. It had been over a year since he kissed her when he came and kissed her when he left. At first she cried, resentful, and then she just accepted it. By Friday, she and her mom had bought Lily a beautiful dress. It was the first big event of her life after all. Steve didn't come home on Friday. He didn't show up until Saturday. but there was no way to wake him up that night to go to the exhibit. Cindy could definitely smell the booze. It was so strange. Steve didn't like to drink at all. Anyway, they were already running late, so they left him to sleep and went to the expo. Marie, is he really rambling? What kind of father is that? Such an event and he can't go to the baby. Mom couldn't even manage to tell her about him and the event because Steve is never home. Marie gasped with indignation, but that's okay. She'll talk to Steve again. Cindy has fallen out of love. It happens, but the baby had nothing to do with it. The show was a real success. So many words were said for Lily that the girl got excited and even had to take medication. But Grandma and Mom saw it coming. That's why there were no consequences. And then already at the very end of the holiday, Mark brought a man to them. "Lovely ladies, please love and complain. This is my son, Rick." He was the organizer of the party. Cindy smiled involuntarily. Mark spoke of this son with poorly concealed pride. "Good evening. I'm very pleased that my father was not wrong again. Creative people catch fire very quickly. But tonight, shocked, though my dad says I don't know how to feel like artists." Cindy had time to get a good look at the man while they engaged in quite the small talk. About 40 years old, maybe a little more. Very personable, austere. But not until he started smiling. A mischievous, boyish smile. And at that moment, it was clear that no, he was 40 and could not be. "Actually, I approached you for two reasons, or rather, two things. One, Cindy, several people would like to buy your daughter's drawings since she is underage. Our man who handles auctions and sales will help decide on the price. And two, I'd like to invite you all to a restaurant to celebrate such a success. But I guess that won't be possible," the man said, looking pityingly at a tired and pensive Lily. "Yes, unfortunately, there is no way. Lily should be resting long ago," Cindy replied. But then Marie intervened. "Cindy, I think an event like this should definitely be celebrated on this very day. You could invite Rick and Mark to our house," she suggested. Cindy smiled modestly. She was embarrassed by her mom's words, but now some words from her were required. "Okay, let's do Tuesday. It's Lily's free day. No classes," Cindy said. Rick smiled contentedly. "Oh, how pleased I am. If only who knew? I hate these restaurants. Here's my whole life across my throat, and I'm always mixing up forks," he confessed. Cindy was immediately relieved. She'd been thinking frantically for a second before he said that, wondering how to get everything set up and ready so she wouldn't fall on her face. Turns out great people can be ordinary too. They agreed on a time, and Rick offered them a ride. Mary Toniova immediately said she had somewhere else to be, so Cindy and Lily had to drive alone. They talked mostly about the exhibit and the house. Rick smiled. "So I'll see you the day after tomorrow. Does that work out?" he asked. "That's great. By then, I think we'll have our buyers decided," replied Cindy. They said their goodbyes warmly. Lily could barely move her legs. "I called it," Cindy thought. She immediately put the girl to bed. She heard Steve splashing in the bathroom. Very good, she thought. Now they're going to talk. Well, he's not so callous as not to be pleased with his daughter's success. About 20 minutes later, the bathroom door opened and Steve appeared in the kitchen. He didn't even ask where they were, as if a kid with an oxygen mask on his face was constantly and freely walking around. "Yes, we're home. It's really good that you're home too. Otherwise, lately we only know about me having a husband and Lily having a daddy from memory," Cindy said. He turned sharply toward her. "And I don't see what you're not happy about. I work like a wolf and I can't even afford anything. All the money is flying into the abyss. You must have forgotten that there is another life, a life that normal people live. They go to the movies, buy themselves expensive things. Their homes don't smell like medicine. They work to live a life of pleasure," Steve said bitterly. "Basically, it's not living, it's just existing. I'm bored with it. Do you realize that?" Steve said. Cindy, in a surprisingly calm voice, said, "And what do you suggest we change? What do we need to do to find a way out of this situation? You realize we can't change anything yet." "That's right, we do," he added. "But I can't. Why agonize altogether when at least one person can live a normal life?" "Steve, I don't understand you." Above all, with a shake of her head, She tried to understand his words. Cindy, I'm leaving. I don't care what you think of me, but I don't want to live like this anymore, Steve said and sat down at the table. Cindy felt the ground beneath her feet shake. Leaving, but it's death for Lily, she whispered with worry and fear. You know yourself that the medicine they give her hardly helps at all. We have to buy everything. How are we going to manage without you? Cindy said with pleading in her voice. Steve shook his head negatively. Cindy, don't try to pressure me with your pity. I'm not trying to. I want to understand. Are you consciously going into this knowing how it will affect our daughter? She asked bitterly. Steve silently stood up and walked out into the hallway. Cindy, crying, tried to follow him. Steve, please come to your senses. Think about what's going to happen to us, she screamed. But he only threw on his jacket and turning to her said, when you calm down, pack my things and don't try to look for me. Nothing will change. Then he closed the door behind him and Cindy folded herself on the floor, crying. What to do now? How to go on with her life? A few minutes later, she heard her daughter calling for her. Cindy hurried to her. Lily was pale, but Cindy didn't see anything serious. Mommy, can I draw? Lily asked. Cindy smiled. You draw all the time. Don't you get tired? She asked. No, Mommy, I like it so much. I even feel better, replied the girl. Cindy restrained herself so her daughter wouldn't notice her confusion. She didn't want to disturb the child. In the evening, when Lily was already asleep, Cindy sat down in the kitchen to assess the medications they had and what they had to buy. Cindy counted the money and realized they could get by for a couple of months if nothing went up in price. She clearly realized that if she didn't come up with anything in those 2 months, she would be finished. But the next day, she remembered that they had to have guests. Cindy had to set aside some more money from the budget for Lily. She did everything by machine, smiling at her daughter, cooking, talking to her. But her mind kept spinning with thoughts of how to handle the situation. The guest arrived on time, but Cindy's mom called to let her know that her dad was sick, so she wouldn't be able to come. Cindy couldn't get enough of the cold as well. You're sorry, daughter, I'll manage, and then somehow I'll be there on my own, she said, trying to reassure the child. Okay, Mom, I'll manage. Mark and his son arrived right on time. Cindy smiled and invited them into the room. Mark immediately felt the atmosphere of home warmth. What are the scents? How can you give up such smells in favor of restaurant smells? He remarked. Rick smiled. Dad was always a stickler for home-cooked meals and family gatherings at home. Mom never managed to accustom him to the social life, he said. Why didn't you bring Mom along? Cindy asked. Cindy looked at Rick. She died 10 years ago. Daddy barely made it out. He loved her very much. Mom was an opera singer and sang until she died. She was a romantic. She was very much into glitz, glamour, he explained. Mark was quiet for a moment and apologized for his question. That's okay, Cindy replied, though inside she was upset. She realized who might have brought it up, but she decided to ignore it and spend the evening in a pleasant atmosphere. We're feeling better now. Mark's voice came from the room where he was talking to Lily. Cindy made a gesture toward the room and said, Come in, please. When they entered, Mark was standing by the table looking at something and quirking his eyebrows in a frown. He glanced quickly at Cindy and then said to Riku, Come here. Now both men were looking at the drawing and were silent. Cindy smiled and asked, What did you see in there? You know? Coincidentally, she wanted to take a look too, but Lily stopped her by saying, Mom, it's not finished yet. Lily quickly hid the drawing, and Cindy was surprised, but decided not to argue with her daughter. She would ask her later why she wasn't allowed to show her unfinished drawings. As they sat at the table and listened to Mark marvel at each dish, Cindy relaxed a little. Rick pushed his plate away and said, So, can we talk business now? I have a card that receives funds from the sale of Lily's drawings and paintings. There's quite a bit of money already accumulated there. I'd like your permission to take some of the works to Italy. There's an annual Young Talent show there in a week, and the prize is very impressive. Cindy replied that she was not receiving any help from the foundation or a foundation of her own that she had set up. Mark apologized for such an uncomfortable question and said that he understood that the medications were not being allocated in sufficient quantities. Cindy explained that her husband had lost his job and now they were barely making ends meet. She felt she was all alone with her problems. She thought strongly that she needed to find a way out of this situation and secure a future for herself and her daughter. Cindy replied that her husband had left them a short time ago because he could no longer work just for her and the sick child. Rick felt awkward and choked on his tea. Mark clenched his fist in a show of support. "Don't worry, Cindy. Everything that happens in life happens for the best," he said. Cindy smiled weakly. Meanwhile, Steve made his way to the park and sat down on a bench. Soon, a woman came over to him and sat down next to him. "So, how did it go?" she asked. "How do you think?" Steve replied. Jane placed her hand affectionately on his shoulder. "Relax. All the bad things are behind us. There's only positivity ahead. In a month, you and I will go to the sea," she said, trying to encourage him. "It will be a great reward for your torment. You'll come back with renewed vigor," Jane said. "Let's get to work. I'm sure you're due for a promotion. You know how hard it was to breathe without oxygen." "Yes, I understand," Steve replied. "Jane, let's make a deal. Let's not bring them up again," he suggested. "Sure, whatever you say," Jane agreed. "So, shall we go home? I ordered dinner from the restaurant. I also bought some wonderful wine. I took the next day off, so we have the whole night off," she said with a smile. Steve smiled back. He would try to put everything that kept him from enjoying life out of his mind. This was the kind of life he had dreamed of shattering, or rather, when he had started hanging out with Jane. It had all happened suddenly, and he hadn't thought about cheating on Cindy, much less with Jane, whom he disliked since the very first day he met her. To be honest, he hadn't seen her in a long time. Probably since Cindy was still pregnant. He'd never once met her or had any interest in her. It didn't matter to him how his wife's ex-girlfriend lived. That day, his car failed to start again. And of course, it didn't happen outside his house, it happened at work. There was no public transportation running at that time, and cabs were too expensive, especially to the other side of town. He decided to walk to the nearest shuttle bus stop, very thirsty. Seeing a small store up ahead, Steve turned there to buy some water. At the door, he almost bumped into some woman. "Excuse me, did you say something?" he asked. And the lady suddenly said, "Steve, isn't that you?" Surprised, he looked up and saw Jane in front of him, well-groomed, wearing makeup and smelling of expensive perfume. He didn't immediately recognize her. "What are you doing here at this hour?" he asked. "My car broke down and I'm walking to the center and you're driving. See, my head is working," she replied, smiling. Steve turned around and saw a bright blue BMW. "That's a nice machine, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about giving you a ride." "Go ahead, buy what you need and get out. I'll wait by the car," Jane offered. Steve took the groceries he needed, walked out of the store and saw Jane, who was indeed standing by her car. "Thanks for your help," he said as he got into the car. "Well, let's go," Jane agreed. They moved further down the street, and Steve felt that he and Jane not only knew each other, but were beginning to communicate again, opening their souls to each other. It was unexpected, but pleasant. Steve went to the counter, feeling mixed emotions. On the one hand, he didn't want to see Jane, but on the other, her presence seemed like fresh air, freeing him from his daily routine. He got into the car, which smelled of new leather, expensive perfume, and something else, something dear and forgotten. Jane smiled and asked, "You like it?" She even laughed. "You talk as if you're living on starvation yourself. You had a good job, as I recall. But jobs don't disappear, do they? Though everything else can certainly be lacking. I mean, Lily's sick, and all our income goes to her medical care. Cindy doesn't work, so we can't afford all the extra expenses. Believe me, I'm sick of it all too," Steve said, and was afraid of his own words. Never before had he allowed himself to be so frank. Jane looked at him thoughtfully. "Look, how about when we retire, we do some relaxation and take our minds off these stresses?" she suggested. Steve thought about it and smiled a little. "That sounds like fun. Maybe that would be our reward after all the hardship, he replied. I'm just running out of reports at work. I'm tired as a dog, said Jane. Steve, not much of a drinker, felt that he didn't feel like going home. Then he suggested, let's go to my place then. I have everything the soul wants in my bar. Steve had not expected such a turn of events on his part. He thought that they would just sit somewhere on neutral territory. And then Jane offered him to come to her house. He realized how such a sit-down could end. Suddenly, he was overcome with a fever, and images of Jane on lush sheets with a glass of champagne in her hands came into his mind. In a hoarse voice, he replied, "Come on, you. Why not?" That night turned everything over in Steve's mind and made him rethink his attitudes and expectations. Jane very subtly and discreetly showed Steve that his self-indulgence was pointless. Think to yourself, what's your fault? You don't have any genetic abnormality. There are no people in your lineage with this condition. Why do you have to suffer your whole life? Don't you think it's unfair? You could live a very good life, she said. Steve listened to her words carefully, realizing that she was right. Maybe he really should reconsider his situation and find ways to live a full and happy life instead of being tormented all the time. I'm sorry, though. It's none of my business. Let's have a drink instead, Steve said. They had a drink, and then Jane put on some beautiful music and asked him to dance. It had been a long time since he danced, a long time since he felt such a romantic setting. But by morning, he promised himself it wouldn't happen again. Back home quietly, Steve could smell the medicine that was everywhere and made everything so gray and sad. He went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, but there was nothing special in there because everything was subject to austerity. A week later, Jane called him. Steve didn't know where she got his number from, but he was glad she called. "Steve, hi. I don't know how you're going to take my offer," she said. "Anyway, it's my birthday tomorrow. It's not a round date, so no celebration. Thought about who I'd enjoy sitting with. And decided that only with you, and I want to see no one else in my house." Was he pleased? He had long since forgotten that Jane was unpleasant, that Jane was angry and jealous. And anyway, what was Jane like now? And what's his Cynthia like? Heaven and earth. And even if Steve gets smashed to bits, he won't change a thing. I mean, not at all. Jane, I'd love to, Steve, but if you're talking about presents, please don't even think about it. I understand. In fact, I think we need to find a way out of this situation. Well, there has to be. They always say there's only one way out of one situation, and this isn't it. Well, I'll see you tomorrow. What time would be best for you? Can you get an hour early so you can be at my place at 6? Steve squeezed his eyes shut. What is he doing? Then he asked decisively, "Jane, can you at least tell me what kind of flowers you like?" She laughed. "I like roses, as all women do." Steve almost blurted out that, for example, his Cindy only adores chrysanthemums. All then, yes, tomorrow. Since that birthday party, something clicked in Steve's head. He didn't want to go home. He didn't want to live like that anymore. He wanted to live well, the way a professional of his caliber deserved. It had taken him a long time to come to this decision. Even though Jane had urged him to move almost immediately, maybe he'd still be hesitant. But then Cindy started talking to him. How'd she get him to do all the posts? And when she caught him up, he just wouldn't shift that unpleasant conversation again. What was the point of putting up with it? He'd said everything to her, everything that was on his mind. Everything had almost been ruined by that drawing, the one he once found on the balcony, and something stirred in his soul. It made him want to cry. I went to bed feeling upset. By morning, I decided I had to end things with Jane after all. She'd sent him a list of hot tours this morning. He hasn't been to the seaside in 1,000 years. It's so tempting. The vacation at work was no problem. "Steve, of course you should go. Don't we get it? You haven't been on vacation in 5 years. Don't worry, we're gonna support your department, so you'll be back. You'll be fine." "How's yours?" His boss looked at him sympathetically. What could he tell him about leaving them? Well, of course he couldn't. He shrugged. "Nothing new." "All right, go on. I won't keep you. Take a break from the hubris." Realizing, though, that a whole different position awaits you after your vacation. It's a good thing you're on vacation. You'll be up and running again. He recounted the conversation to Jane. leaving out the line about his family. Jane rubbed her hands together. But life is getting better. I'll have to get you a decent car first. Your junker's been asking for a scrap for a long time. Then we can expand our place. Steve was lying on the couch believing that's the way it was gonna be. How could it not? He was a free man now. The vacation at the sea was unforgettable. Steve never once had the urge to call to see how Lily or Cindy were doing. And Jane never left a minute to spare. She'd take him on a field trip, to his room, to the beach. He's tan, he's beautiful. Jane would lie next to him at night and say, You're so handsome, you're so strong, you're the best. And he believed it was true. He went to work with pleasure. First of all, he had a good rest. Secondly, he realized that very soon he would become not the head of the department, but the head of the whole division. And this is quite different. Even cars will be allocated to him. And not just any cars, but good ones. His company's cars are all fire. Having greeted the guard, he went straight to the office of the chief to hand over souvenirs from the sea. Good morning, Konstantin Igorovich, Steve greeted. The chief slowly turned from the window. Hello, Steve Andreevich. How was your rest? Very well. Here are some souvenirs I brought you. The chief looked at Steve strangely. He even became uncomfortable under that gaze. And I brought my daughter some too. Steve stopped smiling. Well, what did he want? Sooner or later, everyone was bound to find out, and he was mentally preparing for it. What's the daughter got to do with it? What's she got to do with it? Steve, I've been working with people for so many years, and I would never have thought you were even capable of something like this. Steve hummed. But you can't judge anything because you don't know anything. I'm sorry. I have to go to work. The supervisor gave him an attentive look and shook his head. Clearly, some woman wasn't left out. He chatted with Cindy a few times, and he liked her. A beautiful, quiet woman, strong in spirit, and Steve was just furious. Who gave them the right to meddle in his private life? Who? What did they even know about his life? He slumped into his chair. The only thing separating him, as head of the department, from the rest of the employees was a glass partition. Several times he took a break from his papers and realized that his colleagues were looking at him and obviously talking about him. So everyone here was aware of it too. But the most unpleasant thing that day was not the slanted glances, not the conversation with his boss, when he came to the cafe on the first floor to have lunch. People parted to let him through to the cash register. He hummed, "Wow, respect. They know he's going to be the boss soon." He put everything he'd chosen on the tray, paid and headed for his favorite table by the window. There were only two women sitting on one side of the table, seemingly from a neighboring department. "Enjoy your meal." He set down his tray and sat down. The women silently took their trays and moved to another table. Steve poured himself a fury. The first thing he would do when he became boss was fire these two chickens who stuck their noses where they didn't belong. And a week later, something happened that Steve certainly didn't expect. A general meeting was called throughout the office. Steve showed up that day in a suit and a white shirt. He was well aware that he would be assigned to a new position today. Jane at home gave him a fastidious look and was pleased. "You look great. I like it a lot." After lunch, all the people stretched out to the hall. Steve went too. He sat in the front row where the other department heads sat. For the last time now, he would always sit at the table on the stage. His boss, Konstantin, lowered himself down next to him. He silently listened to everything that was being broadcast from the stage. Then Steve heard something that jolted him, and he quickly stood up, turning out to be the new head of the department. Some woman had been appointed. A second later, he headed for the exit with a swift step. An hour later, when everyone was back, including Konstantin, Steve headed to his office. "Can you explain to me what that was about?" "I thought you said I was going to be the boss," he asked. The warden looked at him and calmly replied, "We all consulted and decided that such a serious post could not be headed by a man without principles. The man is a traitor." "My God, what kind of nonsense are you talking about? 1,000 people get divorced, 1,000 leave their families. Maybe, but in such a situation, what do you know about it? Have you lived in that kind of hell? You haven't? It's not for you to judge," Steve said indignantly. The warden took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose. And how do you know about the others? I have a son with cerebral palsy, and his mom wanted an easy life just like you. No problems. But it's okay. We're doing fine. And by your logic, I should have put him in a boarding school immediately. In that case, I should probably quit, said the boss. Steve already regretted his words. Suddenly, Konstantin would say, yeah, what's he supposed to do then? You know, that's not a bad idea. Anyway, you won't get any more support from me, he continued. In the evening, Jane was long gone from work. Steve himself didn't know why he was so worried. Well, he quit. That was fine. There would always be a job for a specialist like him. He would tomorrow. Jane arrived just after midnight, smelling faintly of champagne. Oh, what are you doing up? Where have you been? Jane looked at him in surprise. What's with the tone? It's a normal tone. I was wondering where my woman has been. Actually, it's going to be morning soon. But first of all, I'm not your woman. Serfdom was abolished long ago. And secondly, what kind of snobbery is this? I'm not going to answer to you for every move I make. We're adults. We have friends, girlfriends, Jane replied irritably. Steve realized it was time to tone it down. But you could have called. I could have, but I forgot, he said, gritting his teeth. She forgot. He called 100 times. First, she hung up on him. Then she just turned the phone off, Steve thought. I've got news, he said to Jane, raising his hands. That's it, tomorrow. I'm insanely tired. He silently followed her into the bedroom, but Jane collapsed so that there was no room for him on the bed. He had to go back to the living room and make himself comfortable on the short sofa. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking. He was hired. The salary wasn't that good, though. Jane was terribly displeased. Cindy should be disenfranchised so she doesn't run around complaining, she said. What makes you think it's her? Who else? Even if it wasn't her, it's still her doing it, Steve objected. There, I told you. They're just poisoning your life. By the way, did you file the divorce papers? A few years later, Jane was fired for a big shortfall. The whole debt was pinned on her. And Steve suddenly realized he was right back where he left off. Only there was the kid, and here was Jane. Just like that. All the money was going into the abyss. Jane was paying off debt to stay out of jail, and Steve was working. Jane couldn't because she was getting less than the principal. She didn't agree. Principal positions are being snapped up very quickly. One evening on his way home, Steve turned down a familiar street, stopped under the windows, stood looking at the glowing windows. It felt so nasty, so bad. I wanted to get up and say what a fool he was to be forgiven. I wanted to look at his daughter's drawings. Steve, are you? He jerked around. Standing next to the car was a neighbor, a grandmother, from the first floor. Hello. Yeah, me. Haven't seen you in a while. You're just standing there for nothing. Your family left, sold the apartment, and went somewhere very far away. You have to take an airplane. Over there to another country. How did they leave? Why? Lily's not allowed. But that wasn't reported to me, Grandma said. Gone, it seemed, to live quite somewhere in Italy. He couldn't understand what was going on. Grandma didn't usually mix things up. She had always been judicious. But if this was true, it turned out to be an unwise decision. The doctors had warned that any trip, any flight, could be Lily's last. The risk of her heart valve failing was too great. Cindy couldn't volunteer for such a thing. Unless she too decided to make it easier on herself. But no, Cindy was definitely not capable of that. He drove out of the yard, thought about calling Cindy's mother, but then decided he'd better not. Now, at least, he could live in peace. But life still wasn't working out. Everything was going wrong. Jane got a job as a bookkeeper at some firm and was making sense. The firm where Steve worked was bought out and recruited young employees. He was offered to stay on as an errand boy or quit. Now he was earning money with some odd jobs. Everything was going wrong. The car was his only asset from the past when he was at his peak. He and Jane had managed to buy their car. Jane sold it as soon as she got into debt. Today, he came in with another job. There was an urge to have a beer and just sleep. But Jane had other plans for him. What are you doing? Giving up? What's the big deal? I'm actually tired. Do you watch the news at all? There's an exhibition of an artist from abroad starting in our town today. She's very talented, but that's not what I mean. The Broads were saying today that the city is flooded with foreigners. Cab drivers must be making a lot of money these days. How about tomorrow? It's kind of a holiday for you and me today, Jane said. Steve looked longingly at the 2 bottles of beer. Maybe tomorrow, he thought. It's kind of a holiday with you and me today. A holiday? What kind of holiday? But I left you 10 years ago. But I wouldn't call it a holiday. Personally, I'd had nothing but bad luck since you left. So, is it okay that you ruined my family? Who needs you? Should I have lured you in with a finger? You didn't have to. You just dropped everything and came running. Even a sick kid didn't stop him. What a man, Jane continued. Steve jumped up, fists clenched. You what, you? He asked. Are you going to hit me? Come on. He stood there, unmoving. Well, here you can't even do that. You can't do anything at all. Steve walked silently toward the door. A little more and he would hit her. He thought it was all her fault. It was just that she had fallen at a time when he was having doubts. Another would have backed him up. It was all her and only her. Steve stopped to smoke next to the mall. On the wall, he saw a large poster. Nika is a young talent. The exhibition was at the House of Culture. I wondered what she was doing here. Well, it's not the biggest city, but it's not small either. Why did she come here? Steve learned that foreigners had come to town to buy the paintings that were on display. They paid well and left tips. The foreigners attracted a lot of cab drivers. The closing of the exhibition was near. I'm eating now. I'll go too, Steve thought. Though he earned a very good salary today, the mustachioed cab driver got into a broken-down Shiguli and sang from his seat. Steve pulled out of the parking lot. It was almost an hour until 7. During that time, he had time to drive around the city 10 times, but there was no work. Who was coming from work was already home, and who was going for a walk? Back home, near the House of Culture, there were many cars, all expensive and beautiful. Cabs stretched along the edge of the parking lot. One car caught his eye, a white Jeep. Steve did not even immediately realize what brand it was. He got out of the car, walked the machine around. Yes, not bad. I wonder how much it cost. He stood for a while longer, then got into his car. How come he fell asleep? Steve still didn't understand. Apparently, fatigue had taken its toll. He picked up the phone, which had already rung several times. Steve, why aren't you picking up the phone? This is the 3rd time I'm calling. Can't you hear me? Where are you? Is there some voice behind you? Steve shifted the receiver away from his ear and was silent for a long time. Yeah, it's nothing. You imagined it. I was just quiet for a long time, he said, waving away the feeling of strangeness. Okay, well, I thought you weren't working then. I am. I'm working, Steve replied. Anyway, when you go home, get some sour cream and herring. Steve wanted to ask where he was going to get the money for that, but he held back in time. It was like he was working, not sleeping. Do you understand me? Jane continued. He didn't answer, just stared out the car window at the street. Suddenly, he saw a woman and time froze. It was Cindy. There was no doubt about it. She was so beautiful, so fashionable. It was like he fell out of reality. It was like it was 10 years ago. But she looked even better than when he left her. Steve, can you hear me? Hello? Jane's voice reached him. Yeah, what's the connection? What are we just paying money for? Steve replied angrily. The phone dropped to the seat and Steve jumped out of the car. Cindy, a woman who had been walking too slowly, stopped, looked at Steve, and her eyes widened in surprise. Steve, yes, it's me. What's not to recognize? You look beautiful, he said. Cindy's eyes went cold. Yeah, well, I didn't recognize you right away. Thanks, I know. Steve felt confused. How's life, Cindy? Everything okay? He asked. How's Lily? It was at this point that he realized he had done a huge stupid thing. Why was he asking about Lily? Although, on the other hand, Lily is his daughter. There's nothing wrong with Lily either, she said. Steve tried to correct his inappropriate phrasing. He was surprised, and apparently he did it too obviously. But did a young and girlish voice speak from somewhere off to the side here? "You're not going to believe this, Daddy. Contrary to your best efforts, I'm not dead," came the voice. Steve turned sharply. Standing next to him was a young girl. Yes, he recognized her immediately. It was his daughter Lily. Behind her stood a man a little older than Steve himself, looking at him unkindly. "Why did you do that, Lily?" "I meant you no harm," said Steve. The girl laughed. "You didn't? You didn't mean us or me any harm when you left us with no money, knowing how much the medicine cost. You knew perfectly well that without them I might die. Mom kept it a secret, but I heard what you told her before you left. But it didn't seem like your life was any better with Alice," Lily continued. Steve was stunned. What kind of trials had his mom gone through while he was taking a break from them? If it wasn't for Daddy Rick, they wouldn't be talking right now. For his and Grandpa's sake, I was able to return to my hometown for my exhibition. Steve stood silent for a moment. Then he asked, "So is that you, the young artist Nika?" "I took a swipe at you right there?" "Yes, Daddy. Now if only you had the money and had the kind of life you want. Or, no, you wouldn't. You're just not capable of doing things like Daddy Rick. You know, he almost went to jail because he forced the pilots of a private plane to land near a hospital. Otherwise, I wouldn't have survived. Would you have?" "No, Daddy, you wouldn't have been able to do anything because you run away from difficulties and problems instead of solving them," Lily said. The man who was standing next to her put his hand on her shoulder. "That's enough. Calm down. Daughter, let's go to the car," he said. Cindy looked at Steve thoughtfully. "But I'm not going to ask how you're living. I can see that already. Goodbye, Steve." Steve was just about to reply something when he heard Jane's exasperated scream. "Steve, wait. Don't go. Jesus, she was just home," Jane yelled. "Maybe she wasn't calling from home." Jane ran up, out of breath, and shoved Steve's bag. "Oh, it'll get me home, 'cause I'm so tired," she said. Cindy, who was already walking toward the car, stopped abruptly. She slowly turned around and stared at Steve's wife. Jane also turned and stared perplexedly at Cindy for a while and then, apparently recognizing her, froze. "So that's who spurred my husband to a better life?" Cindy whispered. A smile appeared on her face. "Jane, how much gold did you not wish for? I guess Steve only needed you to bite me harder too. There was no way I could have guessed it was you. But I guess you're lucky, not for long. You know how people fall from heights? I wouldn't be wrong. You buried your daughter," Jane said. "What kind of bitch are you, Jane?" Steve exploded. "No, my daughter is alive and well, and as you can see, quite successful," Cindy said, turning back to her family. Jane threw a quick glance at the poster and wrinkled her nose like a toothache. "Still something of an act," she muttered. "But you've been decked out in expensive clothes because of the daughter on the bill. So what? So what you haven't had is happiness, and you'll never have simple family happiness." Jane looked at her triumphantly. At that moment, Rick came out of the car again. "Cindy, how much longer? You know our son will be very unhappy if you keep waiting for him much longer. He might even throw toys," he said. Cindy looked at Rick with loving eyes. "Yeah, you're right. Let's go," she replied. She turned to Jane and Steve. "So, goodbye then. Advice and love," she said. They walked to the car. Steve tried to follow her. Igor turned around and said, "Not good." Steve looked at her and shook his head negatively. The car pulled out of the parking lot, and they stood there looking after it. Suddenly, Jane's face reflected anger. "Cindy, well, that's okay. You'll cry at my place." "Steve, you should sue your daughter for child support. She has so much money, and you're stretched thin on bread and water. I know people. We'll get you on disability, and she'll pay like a sweetheart," she said with obvious anger in her voice. Steve turned away, realizing that further conversation with Jane would only lead to more problems. He stepped back inside. Only one thing was clear. He had a lot of difficult decisions in front of him and a fight for his happiness. He turned to Jane and told her that if she didn't want to become an invalid herself, she'd better shut up. "What's that? What are you going to do? A loser?" she asked indignantly. Steve hit the woman for the first time in his life. Not very hard, just slapped her on the lips and walked to the car. Jane screamed all the way down the street, but no one came to help because no one was around. She rushed after him. "Steve, stop. What's the matter with you? Don't you want a good life? But think to yourself how much we could sue her for so much money that she wouldn't even notice," Jane shouted, but Steve wasn't listening. He was absorbed in his own thoughts and sped off. Jane managed to jump into the car at the last second and Steve sped forward. His wife kept talking about something, but he couldn't hear. He had no thoughts in his head. A big white car parked in front of a beautiful house. "Well, here we are home. Tired, Lily?" The girl looked at Rick appreciatively. "No, Dad, Rick, I'm fine. Let's go already. I can only imagine how Joe has tortured Grandpa." They went in, but the house was quiet. That's odd. Actually, they thought Grandpa was already out of it and his 4-year-old grandson had turned the whole house upside down. Rick peeked into the room. Dad then turned to them and pointed his finger into the room, then pressed it to his lips. Cindy and Lily looked into the room and laughed quietly. The grandfather and grandson were sleeping right on the fluffy rug by the fireplace. Grandpa had a toy bow in his hands, and so did Joe. Apparently, they had been running around so much that they had both played and fallen asleep. "Papa, well, the doctor told you not to strain your body," said Rick. "Who asked him to strain it? What, I can't play war games now." Joe woke up too, looked at them and rushed over to Lily. But Dad and Mom let themselves be kissed too. Soon the whole family was sitting around the big holiday table. Lily was pensive. Cindy stroked her arm. "So are you upset?" she asked. "No, Mom, I think I'm even relieved. I wanted to get back at him so badly. Today I realized that he got his own revenge. Life punished him," Lily replied. Cindy pulled her daughter close to her. "That's good. You should never take revenge. Life will sort things out." Mark raised his glass. "I propose we drink to Lily's success. It's a resounding success. And I will say, as an expert on the subject, that there's more to come." "Thank you, Gramps," Lily said. Not 5 minutes later, Mark raised his glass again. "Now I'd like to drink to your return. Native people should live together and, of course, in the homeland." Another 5 minutes later, another glass again. An hour later, Lily and Rick led Grandpa into the bedroom. Rick asked in surprise, "Dad, and what was that? You've never let yourself do that before." Mark stopped and said, "Son, if you only knew how glad I am to have you back. You don't realize how lonely I was out here," the old man said. Rick looked at him in surprise. "But you never said anything." "Should I have?" Mark asked. "No, I didn't want to interfere with your life," replied the old man and went straight to sleep. Lily said, "How he suffered and why didn't we come back sooner?" Rick hugged her and said, "Nothing. We'll all have a life together now. You'll paint. Mommy will plant flowers like she wanted. Daddy will help her. He's a beauty lover too. I will finally take over the firm that is located in this town." Lily brushed away tears. "Joe will go to daycare. He's going to fight and hurt the teachers there. And we'll be scolded and called to the superintendent's office all the time. And we'll set up a line and take our turns at it. We'll see who gives him the fastest," said Lily, laughing and adding, "Come on, Mom must have lost us." They walked out into the living room and saw Cindy and Marie sitting on the couch. Cindy was looking at an album in amazement. In that sketchbook, Joe was drawing all the time. "Mom, what's wrong with your face?" Nick asks. The girl looks in the album, takes a long look and then laughs. "Congratulations, there's one more artist in the family." They laugh and hug. Joe, seeing such a scene, begins to cry. The whole family immediately rushes to comfort him. Cindy looks at her loved ones and realizes that for the sake of such a day, she is ready to go through everything she has already experienced. What matters is the bottom line. And in the end, they are all happy.
2 hours before the wedding, a strange old woman approached the bride, barely glanced at her hand. The sun was at its zenith, and the whole house was full of color. Though Lily's humble abode could hardly be called a home, but it was always in order. She was careful to make sure that there was not a speck of dust or cobweb anywhere. Even the flies were afraid of cleanliness and tried to leave the house as soon as possible. This strange obsession with creating an almost sterile environment was explained very simply. Lily was afraid for her granddaughter. The girl was only 6 years old, and like any child, she wanted to touch everything with her hands. So the grandmother had to remind her child to wash her hands more often, about 10 times a day. The woman lovingly watched Sarah play with the cat. The girl, imitating her grandmother, raised her pet. What do you look like? Can't you take care of your fur? Normal cats don't see you on the street, and your paws are dirty too, and you even lick them. You'll get a stomach ache. Then you'll learn not to listen to your elders. The cat purred loudly with pleasure, enjoying her little mistress's rebuke. Sarah brushed the black, shiny fur of the animal with a massage brush. This tool the girl had taken from her hairdressing supplies. And when her grandmother objected to such wastefulness, she declared, "Grandma, have you forgotten that we are responsible for those we have tamed?" And then her granddaughter's eyes popped out of her head. "Sarah, where did you learn such words?" The girl again showed wisdom beyond her years. "Oh, you're so funny, Grandma. Have you forgotten that I can read? I have very few children's books, and the ones you have on your shelf are old and without pictures." The sadness at the lack of age-appropriate literature was so strong that Lily immediately felt a prick of guilt somewhere in the back of her mind. She responded to her granddaughter's fair comment. "By all means, I'll buy you some books. I will go to the neighborhood and buy you fairy tales. I'll also bring you different treats." The girl looked skeptically at her grandmother. "And how will you bring all this? Maybe on a bicycle? Everyone has cars, and you have a bicycle with crooked wheels. I don't understand how you can still ride it. Even your glasses are funny." Hearing her name, the cat purred again and rubbed its face affectionately against her. But little Mistress Lily didn't like the idea. She pounced on the cat with unfailing severity. The animal lost all fear and jumped right into the child's face. "Get out of here and go catch mice." Sarah took offense. "Why did you hurt the cat? She didn't do anything bad to you." "I didn't hurt your cat either, but an animal should know its place, and I don't want you to get sick from it. Go on, wash your hands." With a grim face, the girl walked over to the hand basin. She washed her hands thoroughly and then put them under the stream of water. Lily grumbled again that all the water was wasted. She would have to carry the bucket on her back again. Wipe her little hands well. The girl caught a soft towel on the fly and began to wipe her hands thoroughly. Lily smiled as she watched her granddaughter, but suddenly noticed something that made her worry. "Sarah, come to me, show me your hands." The girl complied with the request. "Grandma, I washed them well with soap and water you saw for yourself. I don't want to get in trouble." "Stop cooking. Tell me better, where did you get that spot on your hand?" Lily took the little baby hands in her hands. On the wrist of the girl's right hand there was a barely visible pigmentation, a spot the size of a coin. The girl rubbed the spot with her finger, as if hoping to wipe away the dirt. "I don't know, Grandma. I didn't notice it. But don't worry, it doesn't hurt at all. It's not shingles. You'll cure me if I get sick." Lily continued to hold the girl's hands for another minute, then suddenly hugged her and burst into tears. "Why are we being punished like this? My darling, how hard it will be for you." Grandmother's tears frightened Sarah. She too was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "I won't play with the cat anymore. Just don't cry. My arm doesn't hurt. I promise." Lily tried to calm down, realizing that her inexplicable tears had frightened the child. She hugged her tightly, stroked her sun-scented head, and repeated, "Everything will be all right. Everything will be all right for you." There was no telling how long they would have sat like that if they hadn't heard the sound of a motor in the distance. Sarah rushed to the window. "Grandma, your Tony's here again." Visitors to their abandoned homestead were rare. Lately, though, someone from the city had been coming to Lily's house almost every day. Mine might not say no. Sarah didn't understand what these strangers were asking her grandmother for. Lily never said anything to the girl. She always took her guests to the other half of the house, where the girl was forbidden to go. But despite her grandmother's best efforts, Sarah once managed to get there. To her great disappointment, she found nothing interesting in the small room with one window. It was as clean as the rest of the house, only there were bundles of dried herbs hanging everywhere. Curiosity prevented her from keeping her intrusion a secret. "Grandma, why do you have so many brooms?" "What are you talking about, Sarah?" "What brooms, Grandma? Don't pretend to be a little girl. There are brooms everywhere in that room. You won't let me go. It smells like summer in there. I kind of like it." Lily did not scold her granddaughter for unauthorized entry into the pantry. She answered her question briefly. "These are not brooms, dear, but medicinal herbs. They help with various diseases." The girl clapped her hands in admiration. "So, you're a doctor?" "Not exactly. When you grow up, I'll tell you everything and teach you everything." Lily didn't know how to explain to a 6-year-old girl why people came to her for help. Suddenly, Tony made it easy. The former chairman of the collective farm often visited Lily. He would come in his beat-up car and bring them groceries. The man would cheerfully say, "I brought you supplies from a schoolgirl." The grandmother thanked Tony for the delivery and gave him money. All attempts by the man to talk openly were rebuffed. No need to dredge up the past. Let it be the way it is. But Tony wouldn't give up. "Lily, if you don't care about yourself, at least think about your granddaughter. The girl's about to go to school and you're hiding her in this abandoned mansion. What's the point of all this sacrifice? You can't hold a grudge against people your whole life." Of course, Sarah didn't understand what Tony was accusing her grandmother of. In her little life, she had known nothing but this crooked little house surrounded on all sides by woods. It was nice here in the summer and very scary in the winter. Of all the amusements, the girl had only dolls. When Alice was bored with old toys, she played with a cat or read books. That's why Tony's appearance was always a little holiday for the girl. She was the first to run out to meet the guest. "Tony, how nice of you to come." The man lifted the girl in his arms. "How you've grown." "Yes, I'm already big. I can read books by myself." "Even like this? What will they teach you at school if you already know everything? Do you miss it here?" "Not at all, but I want to see the school. It must be very interesting." Sensing that the conversation was taking a dangerous turn, Lily intervened. "Tony, are you just here to chat, or you have business to attend to?" The man spoke hastily. "I'm sorry, Lily. Of course I have business. Actually, I'm here for more. The weed you gave me last time is out. My wife was feeling fine yesterday while she was taking the tincture, but now it's getting worse again. Did you take her to the doctors?" Tony waved his hand hopelessly. "It was all for nothing. I took my wife to the district hospital. All the young doctors were there. One doctor examined her from all sides and then said, 'What do you want?' If a person is 75 years old." Lily was surprised, and she asked, "What am I going to take? What's the use for me?" "I took my wife and we went home unsatisfied." If you believe this doctor, it turns out that at AB you can go to the cemetery in advance and wait for the old woman with the sight to appear. "All right, Tony, don't get upset. Wait, in 5 minutes I'll have a collection ready for you." Lily went into the far room. Tony wiped the sweat from his forehead and sat down on the bench. Sarah settled down next to him. The girl looked at her guest strangely, then said to him in an unfamiliar voice, "Not about your wife, but about yourself it's time to worry. My heart is working at the limit." This adult voice contrasted sharply with the appearance of a 6-year-old girl, so the man jumped up like a scalded man. What did you just say?" The girl came up to him and put her palm to her chest, but now she spoke with the naivety of her age. "And here you have pain. I can see it." "How can you see? What is this nonsense?" Sarah shrugged her skinny shoulders. "As you wish, but I warned you." At that moment, Lily appeared with a paper bag. "Here, Tony, here you go. I've added a few things to make it easier for your wife to breathe. You'll cook the same way." Tony grabbed the bag and rushed for the exit. On the doorstep, he turned around. "Thank you, Lily. And your granddaughter." The woman was wary. "What do you mean?" "Well, nothing. Maybe I was just imagining things." Soon the engine started, and the car rumbled down the country road. Lily asked Sarah, "What happened? What did you do to scare Tony?" The girl smiled enigmatically and looked at her grandmother, but that look made Lily feel a chill run down her spine. "Grandma, I didn't scare him, I just showed him where Uncle Tony had all the redness." The girl placed her small palm over her heart. The woman looked at her granddaughter with wide open eyes, but saw her as a completely different person. Anxiety and horror seized the witch's mind, and this feeling did not leave her until the evening. Lily did not take her eyes off Sarah's sleeping face for a long time. She must have been dreaming sweet dreams, for she had a blissful smile on her face. In the darkness, Grandma covered the girl's arms with a blanket. The strange stain on her wrist was almost indistinguishable. The woman pulled up the sleeve of the sweater on her right arm. There was the same mark there, but larger. Lily sighed heavily. Snaharka's childhood had been spent in very different places. When the war broke out and her grandfather went to the front in the first days, her grandmother and her 2 children were evacuated along with the factory where she worked. Lily's mother was only 14 years old at the time, but she also started working at the factory. At that difficult time, teenagers worked equally with adults without days off and lunch breaks. Therefore, the youngest child in the family was left without adult supervision. Since the situation was critical, the 3-year-old child could simply die. Lily's great-grandmother came to the rescue. The woman lived not far from the place where the equipment and workers were taken. She took her grandson to her village, telling her daughter, "Don't worry, daughter. Everything will be fine with your sonos. At least in my hut it is warm and the milk is regular. But here, in the barrack, cold is coming from every crevice. The child will die here." Until the end of the war, the grandson lived in the village under the care of his great-grandmother. The family was reunited only a year after the victory. There was no point in returning to their native village, as the land there was scorched. Therefore, the settlers willingly accepted the offer of an elderly relative to stay with her. Grandma Marie was famous throughout the area for her gift of healing people. Of course, Naharka and the old woman practiced without a license. At that time, you could go to jail for that. But the local authorities did not touch Marie because they themselves turned to her for help. Lily remembers well how one high-ranking official even cried when the old woman saved his little son from death. He fell to his knees in front of Marie. "I don't know how to thank you. The doctor said with one voice that he was incurable, and you put my child back on his feet in 3 days." Grandma Marie didn't like to be praised, so she answered the official dryly, "Thank God, not me. He can give life, and I am only his faithful servant." At the time, her attitude toward the church was, to put it mildly, not very friendly. But the father of the sick child was not afraid to lose his position and began to advocate for the rebuilding of the small church in the village. This was his way of thanking the healer for healing his son. Little Lily followed her great-grandmother, and the latter told her about the power of various herbs. The girl's mother, although she did not approve of her daughter's involvement in such practices, but she did not object. But grandmother Clava was categorically against it. After all, she served as head of the department, and the party ticket did not call her indifferent to look at such things. One day, Lily overheard her scolding Marie. "Mother, don't you realize you're doing a disservice to the girl? At a time when our medicine is working miracles, and you're using questionable treatments, not only could I lose my job, but you are teaching the child the wrong things." Great-grandmother was silent for a long time, but after hearing such accusations, she calmly said, "You are wrong, Plava. The day will come when you will regret it. And I will give Lily my gift before I leave. Neither you nor Anna have any powers, but your great-granddaughter does." Clava was speechless with surprise. "What are you talking about, Ma?" And then Grandma Marie revealed the secret. "Look," she stretched out her right hand. "Do you see the sign? It was just like my grandmother's and my mom's. They healed people too, and that gift was passed on to me." Clava's indignation erupted into a torrent of angry words. "Medieval ignorance. I didn't expect you, Mom, to believe all this nonsense. No, I can't let it go. Tomorrow we'll leave here." Lily remembers her great-grandmother laughing. "You're not leaving tomorrow. Clava, you're not leaving here at all." There was so much confidence in Marie's voice that it was frightening. But these words turned out to be prophetic. The next day, grandmother fell ill, and Clava and Lily's mother did not leave the hospital bed. For 3 days, Marie tossed and turned in delirium. On the 4th day, she regained consciousness. "Call Lily. I want to say goodbye to my great-granddaughter." When the girl was beside her, the healer squeezed her hand and whispered, "Remember, you have a hard mission, and you must carry it to the end. And never take money from people. Goodness must come from the heart. It is not for sale. If you take even a ruble, you will immediately lose your gift." Leaning over, "I'll kiss you." The girl felt the great-grandmother's hot lips touch her forehead. "Help people, my girl, and I must go." At dawn, a terrible thunderstorm broke out. The dark sky was constantly cut through by flashes of lightning. The wind tore century-old trees from their roots. The village women crossed themselves heavily. Marie walks away with difficulty. The earth doesn't want to let her go. The hurricane subsided as suddenly as it started. At that moment, Lily felt her wrists stinging with fire. The girl screamed in pain. Clava rushed to her granddaughter and couldn't help screaming either. There was a purple spot on the girl's wrist that looked like a burn. Grandmother Marie was 103 years old when she died, but the healer's predictions began to come true with incredible accuracy. The family could not return to their homeland for various reasons, either circumstances or someone fell ill. First, the grandfather died of old wounds. Clava outlived his spouse by only a year and a half. Anna was very worried about her family. If we don't get everything out of here, Marie will drag us down with her. But the move was postponed again and again for various reasons. By the time we were all sitting on our suitcases, another tragedy, her father, Rob, was tragically killed on the job. He didn't notice a down power line and while working in the field, accidentally touched the wires. This death was the final straw. Lily's mom was hysterical. What had we done to deserve all this? It's all that damn old woman's fault. Mom, you can't say that. In a moment of despair, the girl felt the presence of her dead grandmother. She seemed to whisper in her ear. Let Mom keep quiet, or it will be worse. Lily repeated these words. Anna looked at her daughter in horror. Repeat what you said? The girl complied with the request, but in the eyes of the mother froze horror. This is the voice of grandmother. You're talking in your grandmother's voice? Her father was buried in the same village cemetery as the rest of the family. After a modest ceremony, Lily went to visit the witch doctor's grave. She knelt down and cried, Great-grandmother, you took almost everyone with you. Please don't take my mom anymore. I'm afraid to be alone. The girl thought that someone behind her back sighed heavily. During the night, she dreamed of her grandmother Marie. The dream was so realistic that Lily could smell the herbs the witch was grinding in a clay mortar. She could hear birds singing and feel the touch of the wind on her arm. Mary smiled and talked passionately about something. The girl remembered only one phrase. This is your prize. You have no right to give it up. In her 15 years, the girl could not yet fully understand many things. Soon they moved into a new comfortable house, and the dream was forgotten. Only after 10 years, life itself reminded Lily of her special destiny. She spent almost the whole night thinking about it. New details from the past came to mind, and now Lily looked at many events in a completely different way. She was reliving the unbearable pain, the loss of her daughter and son-in-law. Sarah's parents always spent their summer vacations in the village. That fateful summer they came to Lily's house. The vacation was purely conditional, and the woman continued to deliver mail to the surrounding villages and abandoned farms. In recent years, the life of a recluse has become very popular among wealthy people. They actively bought up plots of land far from populated areas and tried to live there in harmony with nature. Some succeeded, and some lacked fresh air and privacy. They returned to the city. So did the director of the firm where Sarah's father worked. Therefore, even during vacations, Lily had to constantly rotate between the city and the countryside. Her husband's frequent trips aroused suspicion in Victoria, who was still on maternity leave. One evening, the boss called Dan. Help me out, brother. I can't trust this case to anyone else. I promise I won't let you down. I'll make sure I thank you. You know, not long ago, the board of directors considered you for department head. Dan's been wanting to take the top job for a long time, so he agreed. But Victoria didn't want to let her husband go alone. I'm tired of all these late-night trips. You're definitely seeing someone. Lily never interfered in family affairs. She kept quiet about her daughter. She only warned the young parents. Leave Sarah alone. Don't carry the baby around at night. She's not a toy. The couple had an emotional argument and Dan got into the car. As they drove away, Victoria tried to reassure her mother. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. We'll be back by noon. As the SUV began to move, Lily ran after the car out of surprise. She screamed, Come back. Don't leave today. But her desperate cry dissolved into the darkness of the July night. Lily tried to convince herself. Dan is an experienced driver and the city is only 40 kilometers away. He wouldn't be late in the morning. There was no point in breaking his heart. Maybe it's a way of psychotherapy, or is it just fatigue? But she spent the night quietly. In the morning, out of habit, she got on her bicycle and went to deliver the mail. Before she had traveled 3 streets of her home village, the wind picked up, and then the sky opened with a downpour. Lily had no choice but to return home. Traveling on 2 wheels in this weather was impossible. Sarah was left in the care of a neighbor, and Lily went home. But no sooner had she taken off her raincoat than her cell phone rang. It was Victoria. Mom, Call an ambulance. Hurry. Dan lost control and the car flipped over. I can't get through to anyone, and the battery's about to die. Lily frantically dialed the ambulance number, but all she heard were endless beeps. Then she called the head doctor at the district hospital, but the receptionist said he was in a meeting. She dialed the ambulance service again. Finally, the dispatcher answered tiredly. I'm listening. The woman's voice trembled with excitement, which annoyed the dispatcher. Can you explain to me clearly what happened? What accident? On what road? How am I supposed to know? Maybe it's a prank? Lily smart-mailed the indifferent dispatcher to send a car to the scene of the accident as quickly as possible. But the dispatcher impatiently snarled and hung up. We only have one ambulance, and it's on its way to you. Hold on, we'll call you back. Lily thought she heard the dispatcher slam the phone down. She couldn't sit at home and wait. Grabbing her bike, she rushed to help her daughter and son-in-law. She didn't even notice when the rain stopped. The accident happened about 5 kilometers away from the village. From afar, she saw the overturned car. There was still hope in her heart that the medics had already arrived at the scene. The bend in the road blocked her view, so she could not see the situation on the road. But the last sparks of hope vanished as she approached her daughter. Her son-in-law had been thrown from the car, and Victoria was still in the passenger compartment. At her mother's appearance, she tried to move, but immediately cried out in pain. Mom, I'm so glad I survived. Lily tried to free her daughter from her iron grip, but couldn't. Hold on, my dear. The doctors will be here soon. I called them. They promised. Mom, where's Dinas? What happened to him? The woman rushed to her son-in-law's body. He gave no signs of life, but she felt a pulsating artery in his neck, which said that the young man was alive. With hands wet from tears and rain, Lily dialed the emergency number again and again. The same indifferent voice answered irritably. Woman, why are you making a scandal here and insulting me? I will complain about you. An ambulance is on its way to you. 15 minutes after the last call, the medics arrived at the scene of the accident. Wow, we can't do it without the EMTs. The girl was trapped. Time had stopped for Lily. She spent almost 3 days behind the doors of the intensive care unit with Dan and Victoria's parents. Dan was the first to pass away, and at 3 in the morning Victoria died as well. The doctor, on whose shoulders the unpleasant task of informing them had fallen, said tiredly. Both had massive internal bleeding as a result of ruptured organs. Had help been given in time, the young men could have been saved. I'm sorry, but we did everything we could and more. Please accept my condolences. After this tragedy, Lily took a long time to recover, but she had a 3-year-old granddaughter in her arms, and she had a duty to take care of her. The woman wanted those responsible for the death of her daughter and son-in-law to be punished. But long court proceedings did not yield any results. On the contrary, the head doctor even tried to pressure her. Lily, isn't it enough for you to go to court? Don't you have anything else to do? You can't get your loved ones back anyway, so don't ruin other people's lives. No one is immune to such accidents, and you should realize that. But if your staff had arrived in time, everything could have been saved. The chief physician waved his hand irritably, as if trying to shake off the dirt from his white coat. But why, for God's sake, do you dwell on this fact? We'd only have one car for the whole neighborhood. You realize that? Don't yell at me, and don't you dare mention God. In the village, I didn't notice Lily disappear from the village with her little granddaughter. Only closer to the fall mushroom pickers saw a woman in an abandoned house near the forest. 10 families used to live on the farm. Then all of them scattered or died. Lily's husband's father had also spent his last days here. Sleep had fallen on Lily, but she had barely fallen asleep when someone knocked softly on the window. Dawn was breaking in the east, and in its pink reflection, the landlady saw the face of a young woman. She immediately recognized Elena, the daughter of a neighbor who sometimes looked after Sarah. What had happened to her mother? Or what other misfortune has brought you to me? No light, no dawn. Elena cried, swallowing her tears. Lily, my darling, help me. Please be quiet or you'll wake Sarah. What's wrong with you, Elena? If I can help you, of course I will. I don't even know where to start. I'll start with the most important one. Why did you come to me? Suddenly, Elena's face contorted with anger. She began to speak quickly and loudly. I want that monster dead. Mark and I were planning to write an application to the registry office. But then that witch showed up. She cast a spell, bewitched him, and I want revenge on her and him too. Alina's eyes burned with an abnormal glint. She grabbed Lily's hand. Make a spell or potion for their deaths. Lily recoiled in horror, pushing her guest's hand away. Then she pointed resolutely at the door, signaling that it was time for them to leave. I don't do that sort of thing, so I can't help you. Go away. The guest angrily threw back the chair the hostess had offered her. You'll be sorry you refused me. I promise you a lot of trouble in the near future. The guest disappeared into the morning mist. Lily tried to solve the mystery of this early visit. Why had she come? After all, everyone knows that I do not practice witchcraft and sorcery. She paid no attention to Helena's angry promise. She was not in the habit of taking offense at trifles. The next day, the old woman forgot about the uninvited guests. Summer was coming to an end, and the rare warmth was replaced by overcast weather. On one of those nameless days in late August, a former neighbor from a distant village came to Lily. I'm sorry to bother you, Lily, but the doctors can't help my grandson. Max is 10 years old. For a year now, he's had a strange rash on his arms and legs. His parents have been treating him in different clinics, paying a lot of money, but no results. So I thought, maybe you can help? Max's grandmother, despite her advanced age, was still mobile and often went to the forest for mushrooms. She sat and waited for an answer. The old woman's eyes shone with hope. That look was so familiar to Lily. Different people had come to see her, but they all looked at her the same way. Of course, I'll help if I can. But why did you come alone? You should have brought your grandson with you. I would have examined him at once and determined how to treat the boy. The old woman fussed. I didn't dare to do it right away. I thought I'd run and find out what to do. Thank you for not saying no. I'll be right back. Lily watched her, never ceasing to be amazed. A man in his 90s. So much energy, this indomitable generation. The woman was doing her housework, and her granddaughter was hanging around, trying to help her grandmother. The company was augmented by a cat. Lily always felt 10 years younger when she was with her granddaughter. The girl lived like a sparrow on the windowsill, and her voice made her feel so good. And now the girl enthusiastically told her grandmother a story about saving a bird. You know, Grandma, I did not expect that our cat is capable of such a thing. The bird must have fallen out of the nest. Or maybe the parents have too many kids and it's too crowded. The bird was trying to fly, and the cat just shoved it. It was just awful. I yelled at her to let the bird go. And did your cat listen to you? Of course it did. Where's the bird now? I took care of it, stroked its wings and legs, and it flew away. Lily decided that this good deed deserved praise. She hugged the girl and kissed her on the head. You are so clever, my dear. And when I grow up, will you teach me how to heal people? I will definitely teach you, my darling. There was a familiar noise outside. Only Tony's car could make that noise. Sarah rushed out to greet her favorite guest. Tony's grandfather had already arrived, but the old man didn't get out of the car. Instead, a lady in a strict suit and a policeman got out of the car. The guests entered the house without asking, and the policeman followed them. Lily, the hostess, came out of the kitchen. Why are you shouting like that? We have a good ear here. The lady and her companion looked at each other. That's good. I'm from Child Services. Lily interrupted her guest. Why do we need the police? I don't hide criminals. And apparently, the said guest's self-assurance offended the hostess. We came to find out what you're doing here, Lily. Nothing much. We live here with our granddaughter and our cat. The lady, without asking permission from the landlady, went around the house and entered the room where the grandmother was preparing herbal collections. She screamed in horror, saying there was no air to breathe in there. The house was unsanitary. How could a child live in such conditions? Lily frowned. Why did you come here uninvited? The lady was speechless with indignation. We were informed that you were mistreating your granddaughter, that the girl was poorly fed and living in unsuitable conditions. We were forced to respond to this report. The lady recovered a little and nodded her head vigorously. Yes, you are here on the farm doing unknown things. And the child sees all this? Please tell me, Lily, where will your granddaughter go to school? September 1st is right around the corner. Have you bought everything she needs for school? This question took Lilia by surprise. She shrugged hesitantly. Not yet, but there's still time. Tomorrow we'll go to town and buy everything we need. Tomorrow was too late. The matter has already been settled. Here's the decision. You can read it." Lily read the dry text and couldn't understand how this could be. "Why? It's all legal. After Sarah's parents died, I'm her only relative. The child will be better off in an orphanage. There are all the conditions for the child's full development. Let's not make a scene, Lily. It would be better if you collected the child's things, although it's not necessary." Sarah looked at the lady and the policeman with widened eyes. She didn't understand what these people were talking about. The girl didn't know what an orphanage was. Only when the woman told her grandmother to pack her things did she understand. The girl screamed, "I'm not going anywhere with you. If you hurt my grandmother, I will curse you." The woman was shocked. "Did you hear that? This is what happens when you choose an obscure guardian. The child should have been taken away immediately." Despite the girl's resistance, the woman roughly grabbed her arm and dragged her towards the car. Only now Sarah noticed that it wasn't Tony who was driving the car, but an unfamiliar young man. Trying not to look at this unpleasant scene, he pulled away abruptly. Lily ran after the car for a long time. Sarah beat the official with her hands and feet. "Let me go. I don't want to be with you. I need to go to my grandmother." The lady threatened her. "If you keep screaming, I will give you an injection. You've already had it twice, and you didn't like the procedure at all." She stared at the disappearing silhouette of her beloved grandmother for a long time. Together with Sari, the warmth of the sun and a little happiness left the house. For several days, the woman did not get out of bed, and only the cat reminded her that there was someone else in the world who the mistress should take care of. Now she spent her days in the company of the cat. She told her about her sad one, and the cat purred. Days, gradually draining her of her strength, but visitors still came for help, and that too made the woman not give up. Autumn passed, replaced by winter with heavy snowfalls. All the roads leading to the house were blocked, so the Tonys, old friends, stopped coming. Lily had to go visiting on her own. Towards spring, she could no longer move around the house without support and made herself a cane from a branch for comfort. At first, Lily believed she could get her granddaughter back. Perhaps the arrival of spring gave her strength and hope for the best. But days and weeks passed. The old woman's health was rapidly deteriorating. The last ray of hope faded. When she learned that good Tony had died after months of illness, she shared her worries with the cat, as usual. But that's the way it always is. A man lives, takes care of others, but doesn't think about himself. Tony cared so much for his wife, but he'd given up on himself. How will she survive without him? I was hoping Tony would take me to Sarah's. I can't even get to the village on my own. Her health problems began to take their toll on her activity. For the first couple of years after her granddaughter was taken away to the orphanage, she still picked herbs in the neighborhood, but then she hardly ever left the house. Her mail was brought to her once a month by the postmistress who replaced her at work. Summer changed to fall, and then winter came again. The old healer was no longer expecting visitors. One day in April, a fancy car pulled up to her house. Lily was overjoyed. But who could she be bringing? Maybe Sarah had come. The cat rubbed herself against her owner's legs, and she went to the door to greet her guests. An elderly woman and a girl of about 6 or 7 entered the house with an uncertain gait. The girl was pale, with dark circles under her eyes. She clung tightly to the woman, who seemed painfully familiar to Lily. "Hello, Lily. Don't you recognize me?" The woman flinched as if she had been electrocuted. Her heart immediately felt heavy because she recognized the guest. "Why did you come here? Are you trying to rekindle old wounds? You've turned my life upside down twice, and now you've come again. Why bring up the past?" "It's all behind me now, and I didn't come here to hurt you. I have another reason. My granddaughter is sick, and no one can help her. People have advised me to turn to you. I understand perfectly well what you are going through, and I am ready to beg at your feet. Please help me. Maybe my sin has affected the child. Don't be cruel to the girl. She is not guilty of anything." Lily froze in the middle of the room like a stone statue. She didn't hear Hope's plea because her memory was mercilessly casting her back to the past. "You turned my life upside down twice. And now you've come to ask for help. I don't know, Jane. Do I have the strength?" Jane's family settled in the village a year later than Lily with her mother and brother. At that time, the village was mostly young people, so the girls became instant friends. Not only did they learn on the job, but they also went to dances together. The girls even had the same dreams. They both wanted to get a good education to raise their social status. However, their opportunities were different. Jane's father had a prominent position, so he helped his daughter to enter the institute. Lily's mother had no such opportunities, and the girl could only dream of education. But the secret desire burned in the sky like a bright star. She delivered the mail on a government-issued bicycle. The bicycle was given to her against receipt, and she was entrusted to take care of it. One day, while performing her duties, Lily found herself in a difficult situation. The bicycle broke down right in the middle of the forest. She had two choices: wait for help or carry the broken vehicle on her back and make her way to the nearest village. She couldn't abandon her possessions, but she couldn't carry both her bag and her bicycle at the same time. It was too heavy for her. Lamb, who had come to visit his father on the farm, watched her attempts from afar. The young man climbed the hill, folded his arms like a megaphone, and shouted, "Can I help you?" Lily didn't realize at first where this offer of help had come from. Along with her cumbersome burden, she whirled in place. Suddenly, as if from the ground, Lem appeared in front of her. "You're spitting like a wolf. That's why I decided to try my hand at being the good wizard. Let me help you. Come right, postman." The young man, without looking at the bicycle, quickly fixed it in a couple minutes. "That's it. Now you can get to work. By the way, I watch you almost every day. You're so punctual you could set a clock by you. You always deliver fresh mail at the same time. May I walk you home?" The attention of the charming young man was pleasant. Lily agreed, but did not show it. The next day, the young tractor driver met the girl at the same place. Their meetings were short, and their conversations were insignificant. Therefore, when her friend Jane came from town on vacation, Lily did not even find it necessary to mention her acquaintance or suitor. Meanwhile, the relationship between the young people gradually grew into love, as it should be. On such occasions, a wedding day was fixed, and guests were invited. But Jane stopped coming to her native village and did not know that her friend was getting married. She arrived where the young couple was expecting a baby. Jane came to visit with expensive gifts and wine. "I'm sorry, my Lily, but I couldn't attend your wedding. You understand the defense of the diploma, then the search for a good job, and then also the collapse of my personal life." The guest poured the flavored drink beautifully, and she continued to complain about her fate. "You're lucky, Lily. Look at the handsome man you have. My fiancé ran away from me. Didn't even leave an address." Jane spoke volumes and beautifully. The wine added to her vigor. Lily noticed that Lamb couldn't take his eyes off his guest. She discreetly nudged her husband to distract him. This technique helped for a few minutes. Then the man stared at Jane again like a mesmerized man. Not 2 days later, Jane again asked for an invitation. Lily was already in the last month of her pregnancy, so she couldn't sit for long. She also walked like a duck. Hope looked like a queen against her backdrop, but the mom to be believed that Lem loved her for being so clumsy. After all, she was carrying their firstborn under her heart. But reality proved merciless to the naive woman. Lily vividly remembered the night Jane helped Lem escape from her through the window. She heard a noise in the next room and rushed in, holding her huge belly with her hand. But it was too late. Lem was running away with her best friend. At a loss, Lily screamed, "Lem, what about me?" He stopped. "I'm sorry, but I may be someone else. I can't live without her," he replied. The stress was so intense that immediately my water broke at the window. There were no contractions. The boy was born very weak and died 2 hours later. For several years, Lily could not recover from the betrayal of 2 close people. She swore that she would never marry again, but fate decided otherwise. She decided to give her another chance at marital happiness. One day she went to the district on business and met a bus driver. There were only 3 passengers, but 2 were asleep. And only Lily stood cheerfully in front of the driver. She wanted to talk to him, so he asked the woman to move to the seat nearest his cabin. Thanks to Joe, Lily felt the desire to be happy again. The man didn't wait long to propose. "We're adults now. It's uncomfortable for you and me on dates to run around. Let's sign." Lily agreed. Joe literally carried her in his arms. He wouldn't let her make a move. He wanted her to quit her job at the post office. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Victoria. The happy father loved to play with the baby. He tossed her up and repeated, "Victory, you are our little Victory." But even this happiness was fleeting. Lily began to notice that her husband was coming home from work later than usual. His favorite butts began to break down frequently. She pretended not to notice anything because she was very afraid of losing the man she loved again. But it's not for nothing they say that you can't hide from fate. One day, returning from work, she caught Eugene in the doorway and with a suitcase in his hand. "Where are you going?" "On a business trip?" she asked. The man coughed. "No, Lily. I'm leaving for another woman. You see, I can't do without her. I walk like a bewitched man." He stood in the doorway a long while longer, but she did not cry, did not reproach him. "If you're going, go. What are you worth? And you let me go so easily. Did you think I was going to convulse? Go your love to meet you." She pushed the man over the threshold. Soon the bitter truth was revealed. Her second husband had been stolen from her by Jane too. Lily really wanted to put a spell on her rival, but she remembered the words of her old grandmother Marie and did not dare to take such a desperate step. And now an aged and changed Jane begged for her help. "Is that Joe's granddaughter?" The guest perked up. "Yes, we have a daughter. I had a daughter too. Where is he himself?" Lily replied. "It didn't work out. I guess God punished me enough. Joe got homesick, then he drank. He got kicked out of his job, and I kicked him out the door too. And then, to make a long story short, he fell asleep in the winter, drunk, and never woke up." Lily didn't answer, stared at the emaciated girl for a long moment. "I'm sorry, Hope, but I can't help your granddaughter. I don't have that power anymore." "What am I supposed to do?" Jane asked. "There is someone in the world who is 100 times stronger than I am." "Who is she?" Jane wondered. "That's my granddaughter, but I don't know where she is now. She was taken from me when she was only 6 years old. Your granddaughter looks a lot like her. If you find Sarah, you can save the girl, but if you don't, no offense. At least give me the address of that house." "I don't have an address. I don't know anything about her." "Come on, Jane, I'm in trouble." Sarah didn't take to the children's group right away. After the first week of her stay at the orphanage, they complained to the headmistress. "This girl is behaving very strangely. She avoids socializing with other children, doesn't want to play, mumbles something to herself all the time. Maybe she should be seen by a doctor." Sarah was checked by all the specialists, and one doctor said that you are looking for defects in the child, but she is a normal girl and very smart. After this conclusion, the teachers did not follow the girl with bias. Little by little, she began to get used to life in the orphanage, but she often dreamed of her grandmother at night when she woke up and cried. One very kind nanny came up to Sarah at night and quietly asked, "Why are you sleeping, my dear? You're crying." "I want to go to grandmother. I have a cat there." "Poor thing. Why do children get this?" "Okay, adults sin, but children suffer." This kind nurse started visiting Sarah. Every shift, she reminded the girl of her own grandmother, and the little girl wanted to repay this woman with kindness. When she came again, the girl whispered to her without a shadow of embarrassment, "Auntie, you have hot here. You need to go to the hospital." The woman recoiled in horror from the girl and began to cross herself. "Witch, be gone, unclean one." That same day, Sarah heard the nanny complaining to others, "There is an unclean power in that girl. She spoke to me in a strange voice." The women didn't believe it. "Did you dream it all up? Maybe you had a bad dream the night before I dreamed it?" The nanny never visited Sarah again, and she realized she had frightened her. A voice that only she could hear in moments of excitement prompted, "Don't say anything else to anyone. It's best to keep quiet about what you see." So Sarah began to hide her gift, but Nanny came to her again very pleased and brought her sweets. "Thank you, little one. Can you imagine? I had an operation right here where you showed me." Sarah pretended not to understand. "Auntie, you have me mixed up with another girl." The nanny shrugged. "That's odd. Maybe I really did dream the whole thing. Grandma used to come at night like that. One day she appeared in the room and sat on the bed. Granddaughter, you have a special destiny because you have a special gift. Don't lose it and use it only for good deeds." Sarah really wanted to talk to her grandmother, to ask about her mother, but the sky hit from the lightning, and her right hand was also burned with fire. The girl screamed in pain and watched in horror as the spot on her hand turned into a blister. The nurse on duty came running to her scream. She too looked at the wound in horror. Where had she managed to burn her hand in the middle of the night? I'm asking you? Go to the nurse's station and get a bandage put on it. Then we'll get to the bottom of this. At the nurse's station where Sarah ran to, she was met by a nurse. "Show me what you have." She examined Sarah's arm. "I don't understand how it happened." "I don't know, I was asleep." The nurse made a bandage and put something on it, and Sarah felt a little better. "Well, better?" Sarah nodded. "Then let's go to the room. We need to see what might have happened to you in there." The woman was puzzled that the night had passed in her sleep, so something dangerous was in or near the bed. Of course, you can't leave it like that. It could catch fire or burn another child. Together with the nurse, they examined the bed. They even lifted the mattress, but found nothing. Then Sarah was allowed to lie down and they continued their search. Finally, the nurse unfolded herself. "Well, there's nothing, ups maybe nothing." The nurse nodded. "It's strange, of course. I don't understand anything." In the morning after breakfast, Sarah was sent to the medical room again. The nurse said, "Don't be afraid. I just need to change the bandage." The woman untied the bandage and froze. There was no burn. There was something that looked like a birthmark at the site of the burn. But there was no inflammation. It seemed that the spot had always been on Sarah's arm. The girl looked at the spot too. It was exactly like her grandmother's, the same size, shape, and pattern. And then Sarah realized everything. She looked up at the woman and said, "My grandmother is gone. She's dead." And Sarah lost consciousness. She doesn't know how much time passed, but they had time to talk to her grandmother about everything. Sarah knew now that she just had to keep quiet and not tell anyone anything so she wouldn't be labeled as crazy. That's what Grandma had said. She also said that the time would come and Sarah would realize it right away. She'd know when she needed her help. Never offer people help. They won't appreciate it. Rather, you live with your own problems. You can only help someone who can ask you for it. Sarah. The girl opened her eyes. A nurse was leaning over her, holding a very odorous, absorbent cotton in her hand. "Sarah, how are you feeling?" "Good." The girl sat up. "Very well. You had a fainting spell." "I don't know what it was. Maybe I didn't get enough sleep." "No." The nurse looked at her like there was something unusual about her. "Well, maybe you're feeling really well." "Yes, I do." Sarah went to her room. She lay down, turning her back to the wall. She needed to come to terms with the fact that her grandmother was gone and somehow live with it. The time had come when Sarah and the other girls her age were sent away from the orphanage. She didn't want to say a warm goodbye to anyone. No, she wasn't mistreated, but there was no friendship with anyone either. Somehow Sarah ended up living as a recluse. At first it annoyed the children, but then they got used to it. Sarah was lucky. She was given a small but nice and clean apartment on the outskirts of the city. She knew for a fact that the apartment was good. No one had died in it. No one had been mistreated, even though it was very small in area, but that didn't matter. The main advantage, a tiny balcony, but you could go out on it in the evening and enjoy the evening air. Sarah began to organize everything. She managed to buy a sofa, a small closet, a table for the kitchen, 2 chairs, and a refrigerator with the money she had been given. The refrigerator had a broken handle, which was the reason for the low price. Sarah was pleased. She looked around her living space and smiled. All that was left was to apply for technical school and find a part-time job. Then everything would be fine. A month later, Sarah had already applied for technical school. She planned to become a designer, but she couldn't find a part-time job. Only one place offered her a position, but only after a trial. Sarah was happy at first, but then she realized what kind of trial the boss was offering. Nothing special, just to spend the night with him. How she wanted to do something so that he would never make such an offer again, but she held back. The only thing she said as she opened the door was, "The boss's reign is short-lived. Today you're above everyone else. Tomorrow you'll be below everyone else." "Are you threatening me?" Sarah looked at him. "No, what are you talking about?" "I'm just saying it happens." Sarah walked outside. The feeling was disgusting, as if she had touched something foul-smelling. She walked determinedly toward the park, to sit by the water, get some fresh air and calm down. Walking in fresh air always helped her. She had been sitting for about 5 minutes when she heard Robia sobbing. Sarah looked around. There were no dogs or cats in sight. She stood up and immediately realized where the sound was coming from. Almost at the water's edge, right on the ground, a girl was sitting and crying. It was a weekday and there was no one in the park. Without thinking, Sarah walked over to the suffering girl. "Hello, do you need help?" The girl turned around, blushing her nose, and shook her head. "No, I don't need anything." Sarah took a seat on the grass beside her. "My name is Sarah, and you're thinking about something bad. You can't do this. He believes in you. He's a part of you." The girl cried even harder. "He doesn't need me. He left me, you know? As soon as he found out I was pregnant, he immediately said he didn't need me. He didn't even let me say anything, you know." "I understand, but what does that have to do with the baby?" "You're right, you're thinking logically. I realize it's hard to accept right now, but time will pass and you'll forget about him anyway. Well, maybe not completely, but you will forget. Why are you planning on hurting the baby?" "And how do you know that?" "I know, that's all. You have a boy. Think about it." Sarah wanted to get up, but the girl grabbed her arm and walked away. "I'm so scared. I just don't know what to do." Sarah thought for a moment and then said, "Come to my place. I live nearby. We'll have tea and talk." The girl nodded eagerly. "Come along. My name is May." They talked a lot. May told Sarah that she had been dating Pasha for a year. "We haven't talked about getting married yet. I haven't been in a hurry. He didn't propose anything like that. I felt like everything was fine. Everything was normal. We are really young." Then I ran to him to tell him everything. I was sure my Sam would be happy. I'd never seen eyes like that before. He was either scared or he hated me completely. I don't know, but in that moment, Sam became mute. He became a stranger. He pushed me away. You have to understand, Sarah. My Sam, the one I was alone with, he just pushed me away. What am I going to do alone with a baby? And you're alone. You don't have a family. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Yeah, of course I do. I have a mom and a dad and even a brother, but do I have to burden them with all that? And I'm ashamed. Sarah smiled. Ashamed? You have no idea how much they'll love their grandchild when he's born. May smiled. You know, after you said that, I started to think about what he could be and what he could be like. Sarah hugged May tightly. The most favorite, and that's the most important thing. Sarah, what about you? You live alone, don't you? Sarah shrugged. As you can see, unlike you, I don't have a family. But how is that possible? The girls talked until late into the night. They fell asleep on the couch, cuddled together. Both of them teary-eyed, but before they went to sleep, they talked about the thing that worried Sarah the most. May's eyes widened as she told her story. And you didn't even go there? No, I can't. I'm afraid they didn't give my grandmother a proper burial. I'm afraid I'll feel really bad when I see the house where I lived. But it's not right. I know, May. You see, I don't have anyone to do it with. I don't know how to explain it to you. May sat up in bed and then says, What do you mean you have no one? You have me now. And I have Rob. Rob is my brother. He has a car. I'll talk to him tomorrow and he'll drive us to that village. Sarah could barely hold back her tears. Really? Of course he is. Wow. It's 2 a.m. I need to get some sleep. I'm not going home now. In the morning, they were awakened by the ringing of Mai's cell phone. Mai stirred, grabbed the receiver. Yes. She heard a male voice on the other end of the line scolding Mai. She listened calmly for a moment, then calmly said, Okay, come to us. My friend needs your help. Sarah looked up in surprise and May turned to her. Give me the address. The girl mechanically gave the address. May repeated it into the receiver. May, are you out of your mind? Why? Rob is my savior. Sarah, I'll show you my room. Not half an hour later, the doorbell rang. Oh, Rob's here. May rushed to open the door. A few minutes later, she was back in the room with a tall, broad-shouldered guy. Meet Sarah. This is Rob. Rob, this is Sarah. Sarah was silent. Rob was silent. They stared at each other without blinking. May suddenly laughed. Are you two petrified? Sarah woke up first. You're imagining things, May. Hello. 2 days later, they drove to the place where Sarah's early childhood had passed. The girl was nervous, anxious. May sat in the back seat and said, I'm going to sleep. As soon as a sniffle was heard from the back, Rob covered Sarah's hand with his own. What's wrong? It's going to be all right. We're with you, aren't we? Sarah actually calmed down. Finally, they pulled up in front of the house. Sarah got out of the car. She stood looking for a long time, then went inside the house. Someone was starting to be a good host here. Everything was overturned, smashed. They must have thought Lily had endless riches here. The girl covered her eyes with her hands. Well, they hadn't found anything. They were pissed off. She crouched down on the couch, seeing something shining on the floor. It was Grandma's ring. She never took it off. She always wore it. Sarah had asked to try it on several times, but her grandmother had always replied that the time would come and she would try it on. Apparently that time had come. She picked up the ring for a second, pressed it to her lips, and walked out of the house. "Rob, we need to get to the cemetery. I'll show you." She couldn't remember where the cemetery was, but she was sure they were going the right way. After a few minutes, they saw the fences. May asked, "Do you know where Grandma is buried? Maybe we should split up. The cemetery is big." "No need, I'll find it myself." Sarah walked confidently forward. She walked so fast, so confidently, that May and Rob could hardly keep up with her. Finally, the girl stopped at a grave overgrown with grass. "Grandmother, how is that possible?" Sarah pressed her lips together and knelt down in front of the grave. She began pulling the grass. May followed her example. They said, "I'll be right back." I had shovels and a small hatchet in the car. An hour later, they had the grave cleaned up. "Hello." They turned around. There was a middle-aged woman standing nearby. "Am I reading this right? Is this where Lily is buried?" Sarah nodded and asked, "Excuse me, did you know her?" The woman smiled. She knew her even better than most. "Dead then. How long ago?" 6 years ago, Sarah whispered quietly. The woman shook her head. She wasn't lying. That meant she was going to die. "And you, Sarah?" The wind picked up, so strong it was bending the trees. Rob grabbed Sarah and May's hands and ran to the car. Sarah had felt the woman's heavy gaze on her until that moment. The girl understood perfectly well that the one wanted to tell her something. But what was it? They got into the car and drove off. The wind died down immediately. The sun shone in the sky. Rob snorted. "I've never seen anything like this before." "That grandmother was me." Guy looked at Sarah in surprise. "Do you believe all that nonsense?" "What kind of nonsense?" "About powers and stuff like that." "Don't you?" "No, of course I don't. You have to be a complete idiot to believe all that nonsense." Sarah turned away. "I think you're wrong. It's impossible not to believe in something that exists." Rob drove the car with confidence. "Sarah, is it women like you who believe in everything?" "Trusting. My May believes in the same nonsense, but think about it. A man gets a serious illness, and the doctors fight for him. The treatment is long and difficult. A man, after hearing people like you and May, decides he needs to find a grandmother. So he goes, gives some crazy money. Some half-literate, dirty old woman whispers at him, and the man goes home. The treatment is already bearing fruit, but not Bapkina, the real one. And all the legends are ready. The doctors failed, and the dirty old woman helped." Sarah smiled and turned away to the window. "There are plenty of people like Rob in the world." Rob swore. "Where do you think you're going?" Suddenly he slowed down and another car overtook their car. And there was another car coming the other way. And if Rob hadn't braked suddenly, whoever was driving wouldn't have had time to get back into his lane. And the accident would have been inevitable. Sarah saw the frightened face of a child in the window. The car flashed by and disappeared around the corner. Sarah tensed. There, a drunken man was driving. They took a quick glance at her and sped away. They hadn't seen the crash itself. They had already seen when the cars in front of them stopped and people ran towards the overturned car. They jumped out and ran too. Sarah followed May. When Sarah pulled up to the scene of the accident, there was a 10-year-old boy sitting on his knees in front of the drunk driver. He had no injuries, but the child was lying with his eyes closed. Someone came up behind her and said the boy's heart stopped from fear. "Is that true?" "Yeah, they already tried to resuscitate him. Look, a man, he's a doctor from some car, came running up." Sarah looked at the man. He was wiping his hands. His face was upset. Sarah calculated that no more than 20 minutes had passed from the time the car had passed them until now. Considering they had driven about 5 or 6 kilometers, It was incomprehensible why the doctor had stopped performing resuscitative measures when the boy was in such a state. She looked up and saw the grandmother. She stood next to the boy and looked reproachfully at Sarah. Sarah took a step forward. She was running out of time. In the distance came the sound of an ambulance siren. Rob wanted to hold her back, but she paid no attention. She knelt down next to the boy. The father was next to her. Sarah paid no attention to him. She placed both hands on the boy's chest. Right here, this is where the hottest spot is. She pressed hard with both hands and immediately let go. The boy's breath caught. Sarah held him while he thrashing and thrashing. When the boy calmed down a bit and began to breathe, the girl pulled him back into place. Such fatigue overcame her. The people around them were silent, just staring. Sarah saw the look in Rob's eyes. It was, I wish she hadn't seen it. May ran up to her. May, help. The girl picked Sarah up and led her to the car. Sarah felt Rob take her under his arm. Someone was screaming to stop this girl. She had done the impossible, but Sarah stubbornly walked to the car. The ride into town passed in silence. May and Rob brought Sarah home. May made her some tea. The girl drank and felt her strength gradually returning to her. She realized that Rob wouldn't look at her anymore. He liked her so much, and she didn't just like him. The next day, May asked Sarah, "Can you tell me what it was?" Sarah shrugged her shoulders. "It was nothing much. I just helped the boy's heart a little." May sat thinking about how to phrase the question. Asked Sarah, "Which one are you?" She searched for words, eyes wide. Sarah laughed. "May, you don't think about it. Just tell me, have you told your parents?" May sighed and then cried. "Yeah, when I told them I wanted to get rid of the baby, my dad almost killed me. He was yelling so loud that we were a family, that we would always help each other." "Then why are you crying?" "I don't know. I never knew. I never thought it would be like this. You see, like everyone else, I dreamed of having a family, a husband, children, and now it's all ruined. But don't worry, I'll be a good mother." Sarah stroked her hair. "Everything will be fine. You'll have a husband and children. Just don't rush things and don't try to change anything. Everyone has their own destiny, and all the changes in it that a person supposedly makes are predetermined." May wiped her eyes and looked at Sarah admiringly. "How you know that?" "Yes." She pointed her finger somewhere in the ceiling. Sarah laughed. "Yes, the ceiling told me. Come on, let's go get something to eat." May kept trying to find some connection to some higher power in what Sarah was saying, and Sarah had to have a serious talk with her. May was offended at first, but then she said, "Okay, I understand. By the way, my ex-boyfriend, can you imagine, signed a contract and went somewhere to serve. It's weird. Maybe he just needs some time." "And how's Rob doing?" May smiled. "It's funny watching these two martyrs. They think no one can see anything. In fact, it's clear as day. Rob sits at home like a bear and is angry. Even his mom keeps asking if something is wrong with him. Rob says no and locks himself in his room. But as soon as May mentions Sarah or starts telling her parents about May, the door immediately opens. Sarah pretends she doesn't know Rob at all, not even an acquaintance. But every time May mentions him, he flinches like an electric shock. Rob's suffering, just like you. He suffers and thinks we can't see it." Sarah looked at May with fear. "Suffering? Why?" May smiled. Sarah was embarrassed. "I don't suffer. Where did you get that from?" Fall came and Sarah began to study. She saw May a lot. Sarah was still trying to find a job, but nothing was working. May, on the other hand, never came empty-handed. Either her mom sent guests or she spent the night. And she liked to eat. Sarah was well aware that her friend was trying to support her so she wouldn't have to spend so much, but May didn't want to hear any of it. Close to New Year's Eve, May came to Sarah's house with her mom. "Hello, Sarah. My name is Arya. We've wanted to meet you for a long time. If it weren't for you, our mind would have made a lot of trouble." May smiled. Her belly was already quite large, but unlike many pregnant women, May didn't become cranky or moody. On the contrary, she became kinder and friendlier every day. May's mom turned out to be a wonderful woman. They sat down to drink tea and cake, and the woman got up. "We didn't come for nothing. We came to invite you to our New Year's party. You don't have to say anything. No refusals will be accepted, and that's final. New Year's Eve is a family holiday, which means it should be celebrated with your family. Sarah's blushing. Well, no buts. Sarah, you become a real friend to May. She talks about you so often that my husband and I already consider you our friend. So no rejections, we're gonna have fun. You bet we will. Oh, I forgot. We don't celebrate New Year's Eve in the city. We have a house in the country. We use it as a summer house. That's where we always celebrate the holiday. Rob and Dad make snowmen. We decorate the tree outside. She looked at Aria with a mesmerized look. She had dreamed of this ever since she was in the orphanage. But there was a catch. Rob would be there. New Year's Eve was in the air everywhere, and Sarah had just entered the yard when a snowball hit her. She shrieked and saw Rob peeking out from around the corner of the house and smiling. Sarah dropped her bag, grabbed a handful of snow and ran to him. For about 15 minutes they laughed and threw snow at each other. Then Rob caught her and gave her a hug. That's it. I won't let you go again. Got it. Sarah nodded and buried her nose in his chest. There they were, the lovebirds. Aren't you ashamed? We're waiting for you in there. We have a salad to make, a tree to decorate. And they're just standing there hugging each other. May, you have a knack for showing up when you're least expected. May laughed and turned to leave the house, just as they all heard. Hello, May went pale. Slowly, she turned toward the gate. In a second, Rob was between his sister and the gate. What people? Sam. Rob clenched his fists, but Sam looked at him calmly. Rob, don't joke around like that. I need to talk to May. Only now did Sarah notice that Sam, whom she had never seen before, but for some reason imagined to be exactly like this, was in a military uniform. Rob must have noticed her too. He turned to May. Well, why don't you say something? May shook her head stubbornly. Let him talk. I have no secrets with this man. Rob smiled and crossed his arms over his chest. You've got 10 minutes, Sam. Sam sighed. I'm so sorry. I was so scared at the time. How could I be? I'm a kid at heart, and this is my kid. My brain couldn't process that kind of information. I knew I was treating you like a pig, and I felt like a pig. I couldn't think of anything better to do than sign a contract. I thought it would be the only place where my thoughts would fall into place. And it did. Only for that I had to experience the afterlife. When I woke up in the hospital, I realized that if you didn't save our baby, it would be my fault. And I couldn't take it. Life is precious. I'm sorry. Sam lifted his head, looked at May carefully, and Sarah immediately realized what was wrong. May was out on the street in some kind of rustic coat, and there was no way to tell if she was pregnant or not. May suddenly asked, I don't get it. What were you doing at the hospital? Sam smiled stupidly. I was hurt. I barely made it out. They sent me home. May rushed over to him and hugged him. Go get some rest. She started crying. What's going on here? It was chaos. Sarah loved it all, loved the feeling of happiness. 2 more months passed. May and Sam signed right away. They both said there would be no wedding. They would spend time with their families and then go to the country for a month. But Rob and Sarah's wedding was set for March. A month before the wedding, May gave birth to a strong, healthy baby boy, who they named Steve. So Sarah, what happened? I don't know. I'm just so nervous. I'm freaking out. Rob loves you very much. Yeah, I'm not nervous about Rob. I know he loves me. Something's wrong. Something's going to happen. May, be serious. Can't we postpone the wedding? No. Do you know how Rob feels about all this? He doesn't believe it. He won't even talk about it. Yeah, I know. I tried to talk to him about what happened on the road. He told me not to bring it up. It's just a coincidence. Well, let's not think about the bad stuff. As long as no one gets killed, the honking of cars could be heard on the street. May smiled. My brother likes it loud. Sarah took her hands in his. Say, May, aren't you upset that you're without a wedding and we're like this? Are you out of your mind? Of course not. It was our choice. The wedding wasn't important to us. We just wanted to be alone as soon as possible, you know. No one else around. Even though we made up, there were still some rough edges in our hearts. Now there aren't, so no hard feelings. Sarah smiled. I can't believe I'm going to be a wife now. I wish Grandma could see it. May smiled and gave a concerned look. Something tells me she sees everything. At that moment, the champagne in the room opened with a loud clink. Sarah smiled. And May ineptly crossed herself. God bless. I hope someday I'll get used to all this. The wedding was only 2 hours away. As Sarah and Rob walked outside to get into the car, an elderly woman rushed toward them. She stopped in front of Sarah, and Rob looked at Sarah confused. The old woman suddenly reached out to her and took Sarah's hand. She pulled back the edge of her wedding dress and asked, "Are you Lily's granddaughter?" Sarah replied, "Yes." "And who are you? Weren't you at the cemetery then?" "I was. You ran away from me, and now my granddaughter is dying because of you." "Because of me? Why? You wouldn't talk to me. I was looking for you. Your grandmother helped my granddaughter, but not for long. She said she couldn't, that she didn't have the strength. But I think it was because she resented me." "Did you hurt your grandmother?" "Maybe I did. I stole her husband first, and then the other one. I always hated Lily. She was better. And then it just so happened that I had to go to her, apologize, step outside of myself. She did it on purpose. My girl, my beautiful girl, she's dying." Sarah asked in a high-pitched voice, "What exactly? Did my grandmother tell you?" "Jane, that was her name." She raised her tearful eyes to her. "She said that she didn't have that kind of strength anymore, that she was going to die soon, that there was someone much stronger than her. And that was you. She asked me to find you and told me you would have that mark. I couldn't. I knew nothing about you. No last name, no year of birth. Then I went to the cemetery to tell Lily everything, and there you were. I didn't make it again. I ran after you. But how could my legs catch up with you? Then I saw you outside the wedding dress store. I just drove by. And it took me so long to find out where you lived. My granddaughter was admitted to the hospital today. She's been unconscious since this morning. It's you and Grandma's fault that she's dying," cried the old lady. Rob stood puzzled, May was horrified, and Sarah was at a loss for words. Where was she? What hospital? The old woman looked at her. In our regional hospital. Sarah turned to Rob. "Rob, darling, you'll scold me later. I'll listen to anything you have to say. We don't need these 2 hours. We'll make it in time." Rob shook his head as if to shake off the stupor. "Sarah, we're getting married, and you're not a doctor." "Rob, we'll do it later. I'll forgive you." They got into the wedding car, putting Jane in the second car. May went with her. All the way Hope cried and said it was her fault, not Sarah and her grandmother. But she couldn't admit it. May listened in silence and thought about how unfair life is. Sarah has to help the one who once ruined her grandmother's life. At the hospital, they were looked at as if they were from another world or aliens. No wonder. The bride's wedding procession rolled up to the hospital porch. The groom, the witnesses, and the grandmother who'd been shot. They rushed into the ward almost at a run. No one even stopped them, because everyone was so confused that they just froze in their seats in front of the room door. That's when Sarah stopped. She walked in, but didn't close the door behind her. May heard. "What's going on in here? Let me in right now so everyone can get out of the room." They were having a masquerade ball. Rob turned to him. "Don't make any noise, doctor. Just pretend nothing is happening for 10 minutes. The doctor glanced at Rob, who hopelessly continued right where he stood. "What's it worth to you? But that's no reason to barge in here in droves. Please." The doctor was silent. He looked across the room at Jane, who stood crying. She kept repeating, "My girl, I didn't keep her safe." The girl lying on the bed was so pale she blended in with the sheet. She was so thin, like she wasn't real. She was a couple years younger than Sarah. She looked to be about 12. Sarah crouched on the edge of the bed and took the girl's hand in hers. "Hey, girl." The girl's eyelashes fluttered, but she didn't open her eyes. Sarah put her hand on her forehead, stared at her face for a long time, and the girl opened her eyes. The doctor gasped. "What's that?" Jane turned around. "Quiet. You couldn't cure your granddaughter, so be quiet." May nudged the old lady lightly. "Stop spreading negativity around you." Jane was silent. Sarah was already talking to the girl. "Tony, what do you want?" The girl smiled lost. "I want a pier." Sarah turned to those at the door. "Please close the door, find a pier, and don't come in until I come out myself." Sarah was pale, swaying slightly. The pier was brought in. Jane handed the pier in a bag. Rob ran to get it. "I'll take it." Sarah raised her hand. "You can't." "Why not?" As long as you're around, the girl won't get better. You've got too much negativity. You can send her to the other side if you want. Go." Rob looked dumbfounded at the open door of the ward. The doctors were fussing around the girl. They were hooking her up to something, putting in IVs. The girl was conscious. She was answering the doctor's questions. He turned to Sarah. "How are you?" "I'm fine. We're going to get married." Sarah smiled tiredly. "Are you not feeling well?" "I don't want to miss my own wedding." Rob picked her up in his arms. "Then we'll go like this." He almost ran down the hallway, everyone following him. Jane stood in the middle of the corridor and looked sadly into the ward. Maybe Sarah was right. All her life Nadia had used others, and when she no longer needed them, she had simply cut them out of her life. The same thing had happened to her daughter. As long as her daughter was good, beautiful, as long as she was proud of her, she supported her in every way she could. But then, when the girl got sick and the daughter in desperation grabbed the bottle, Jane simply deprived her of parental rights and forbade her to go near her daughter. The daughter stopped drinking, begged her mother to allow her to see the girl, but Jane was adamant. Such a person should not be near her granddaughter. She always knew how to control people, make them feel guilty. Now her daughter lived somewhere on the edge of town. Apparently, she had rented a room, worked somewhere, and never bothered them again. Although Jane knew she stood under their windows for hours on end, she managed to convince her daughter that it was all her own fault. Jane handed the peers to the nurse. "Please give these to my granddaughter." "What about you?" The nurse smiled. She was genuinely happy for the girl, who suddenly woke up, as if she suddenly wanted to live. "I can't. I need it now." Jane went outside. Her heart pricked unpleasantly, as if it was tired, probably really tired. She was about to walk on when she saw a familiar figure in the park. Her daughter stood leaning against a tree, crying. Jane made her way toward her. The woman saw her too late and couldn't escape. "I'll be right out. Just tell me, how's my daughter?" "Go see her. She always missed you." "Mom, don't talk." Jane pulled a bunch of keys out of her bag. She singled one out. "It's for the apartment. Come home. The girl's gonna need your help." She headed for the exit. Jane knew she wouldn't make it home. Lily had told her about it. No one had. Jane saw Lily standing next to Sarah when she was with her granddaughter. In the evening, the daughter came home. Jane was lying on the bed, money on the table, some papers and a note. "I'm sorry for everything. The doctors diagnosed heart failure, age plus nerves. Didn't Mom take care of herself? It's been a year. Rob, stop fooling around. Let's get the tree decorated." Sarah laughed and spoke with difficulty. As soon as she and May tried to go outside to finally decorate the Christmas tree growing in the yard, snowballs immediately fell on them. Sam and Rob were well prepared. May, laughing helplessly, told Sarah that they had found a broomstick for them. Well, like little kids, honestly. She took the mop, put an old fur hat on it, and set it out the door. Just then snowballs hit her and the door, but that was all. Now they had enough. May took Sarah's hand resolutely and led her behind her. "We have nowhere to go. Let's go up the hill. We're going to climb out the window and give them hell." Aria saw Sarah and May laughing with her eyes. The women gathered snowballs and quietly crept up behind them with their husbands. Sarah was about to throw a snowball. The husbands looked out from behind the fence so funny, but May shook her head and pointed to the 2 snow shovels that stood by the barn. With difficulty, they lifted the piles of snow onto them and dumped it all on their husbands' heads. They screamed. No one expected such meanness. And immediately a small pile formed on the snow. "Hello." They froze, stood up shoveling the snow. In front of them stood a girl who looked like Sarah, and a woman about 45 or so. "Hello, excuse us." Sarah was the first to recognize the girl. The girl smiled shyly. "My mom told me everything. I came to thank you. My mom said we're sisters." And then it hit Sarah. She had never thought about the connection to this girl, and she felt it immediately. She thought it was just because of their grandmother's friendship. "Wait, so you mean you're my own aunt?" The woman nodded. "I don't know if you could call it real, but yes." May took the initiative. "Come on in the house. How did you get here? Did you take a bus?" "No, cab. There's something waiting for you." "Let go of the cab. It's New Year's Eve. And as my mom says, New Year's Eve should be celebrated with family. We're a big, close-knit family. I think there's room for 2 more members." The woman looked at her daughter, then at Sarah. "This is awkward. You don't even know us." Sarah stepped between them, hugging one and the other. "Let's get to know each other. It's not our fault our grandmothers were so passionate when we were young, isn't it?" No one remembered such a New Year's Eve. They went to bed at dawn. Only the son went to bed first, and that was only because he was tired of opening presents. Sarah snuggled up to her husband. "Okay, I've told you before how much I love you. I don't remember exactly. Can you say it again?" Sarah giggled softly. Not so long ago, when she had lived in the orphanage and knew her grandmother was gone, she couldn't have imagined what a big, close-knit family awaited her. Now she felt so happy she was even scared. She closed her eyes, so as not to scare away the happiness. Rob fell asleep very quickly. Sam and their daddy. Sarah covered herself. She stretches sweetly again. "Oh, I'd sleep some more, but I have to get up." They walked out of the room. May and Sam were sitting on the couch. They were doing worse than Rob and Sarah. Aria brought out the plates. "May, so you're up?" "Yeah, I had to keep my unhappy parents company." May rested her head on Sam's shoulder and tried to doze off. Her son, as soon as he saw such distress, immediately came over and opened his mom's eyes. Sarah laughed and then looked across the table and turned pale. Everyone stared at her. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "Oranges." She covered her mouth with her hand and hurried out of the room. Rob stared at her confusedly. Aria smiled first. "Oh, thank God." Then May giggled and Sam stopped yawning. Everyone looked at them in bewilderment. "I don't understand why you're suddenly so excited about Sarah being sick. Is that so funny?" The door opened and my sister and Mom walked into the room. Mom immediately asked, "And when are you?" Rob looked at the woman confusedly. "When what?" "When what?" "To give birth." You should have seen Rob's face when everyone laughed. He ran out of the room to find Sarah and ask her, just to ask one question. Sarah was sitting outside, tangled up in some sort of coat. She was looking at the sun and squinting. He lowered himself down beside her. "Sarah, what was that?" She smiled silently. Rob sighed. "I'm about to kill someone. Everyone's laughing, smiling, happy, and I don't understand a thing." Sarah turned to him. "We're having the girl, I know it." Rob looked at her, then hugged her. Of course he wanted to scream and scold. How could you abuse a human being like that? But he needed to make sure she didn't see his tears. "Rob, don't cry, it's okay." She wanted to ask how she saw him crying. Then he remembered who his wife was and that she didn't need to see. He mentally waved his hand and said, "But it's the name I choose." Sarah backed off. "What are you having the baby for then?" Rob smiled and hugged his beloved.